Chapter 876. AMU was sealed there in exchange for a breath of life in the galaxy. These words hit Sumo's chest like a heavy hammer. At the same time, he felt a deep stabbing pain. Sumo's complexion changed, his cheeks tightened, because at that moment, he felt that he should be like AMU, filling the sea with his own body. Sumo, AMU, one positive and one negative of the karma roulette. At the same time, there were also the two lotus souls of the Three Realms galaxy. Then, Amu shouldn't have to bear all of this alone. However, what Sumo could do now was very limited. Demon King. The reason you can temporarily be worry-free in Izong is because someone is bearing the burden for you. The plain-clothed female cultivator said, I think you should understand this truth. I understand. Sumo took a deep breath, then nodded. In fact, besides the plain-clothed female cultivator, Wang Yud also said this before. Wasn't AMU maintaining the Three Realms galaxy? Very good. The plain-clothed female cultivator nodded. Then, the plain-clothed female cultivator waved her hands in the void. Whoosh! On the ink-blue sea, huge waves rose again. The entire sea was rolling, as if a tsunami was about to happen. The waves were thousands of feet high. Layers of waves rose, and then a huge object slowly rose from the waves. It was a huge bronze scale. It was thousands of feet high. Its beam was carved with the sun, moon, and stars, as well as many strange runes. On top of the beam, there was a lotus flower. However, the lotus flower was in bud, a flower bud. On both sides of the beam, there were two silk threads, one black and one white. From afar, it looked like two waterfalls falling from the sky. Under the thread, there was a huge copper plate. The copper plate was empty, and there were no weights on it. The entire scale exuded an ancient aura. Gray mist lingered around it, giving off a mysterious and unfathomable feeling. What is this? A magic weapon? Sumo had never seen such a thing before. What is this? Sumo asked the plain-robed female cultivator. It's called the Lotus Realm's Sky Scale. The plain-clothed female cultivator said. What's it for? Sumo asked again. It measures the weight of life. The plain-clothed female cultivator said with a faint smile. Actually, every Lotus Realm has a scale like this. It could screen out those who could fill the sea with their own bodies. If such a person were to enter the eye of the wind wheel, he would be able to temporarily preserve a world that was about to be destroyed. Oh, Sumo frowned and said, then can I fly up to the scale and try? Ha! Hearing Sumo's words, the plain-clothed female cultivator shook her head. This is not a test for you. In a while, I will let you choose who to throw into the eye of the wind wheel. Sumo's heart skipped a beat, because he had a bad premonition. Who? When he looked again, he saw that the female cultivator was standing in the void, forming seals with her hands. That was actually a set of rather complicated spells. Actually, when a cultivator reached the supremacy realm, they could already create spells with a single thought. At this moment, the plain-clothed female cultivator was actually forming seals with her hands. That was enough to show how powerful this spell was. Sumo looked at the spell of the plain-clothed female cultivator. A gray light rose from the plain-clothed female cultivator's body. It was extremely similar to the light of primal chaos. Then, the gray light directly surged towards the whirlpool of the sea. The gray light filled the sky, instantly filling the entire whirlpool. It was like a gray seal. At the same time, the Lotus Realm scale directly flew above the gray light. When he looked again, the white light that was surging from all directions began to gather on the copper plate on one side of the scale. Immediately, the scale began to gradually tilt. The plain-clothed female cultivator's hand seal changed. At this moment, an ancient bronze weight appeared on the other side of the scale. That weight was actually a rather ugly stone. However, on it floated a line of small words. 1,000 immeasurable souls. One soul suppresses the sea. Looking at those words, Sumo did not understand what they meant for a moment. And the moment that weight appeared, it directly tilted the scale towards the side of the weight. Every ray of white light represents the life of a galaxy. The plain-clothed female cultivator looked at the Lotus Realm scale and said, "As long as both sides reach a balance, then it will be able to fill up the life weight of the eye of the wind wheel." "Then how many lives do we need?" Sumo asked. The plain-clothed female cultivator, shook her head and smiled bitterly. "Demon King, did you not see the words on the scale? 1,000 immeasurable souls. One soul suppresses the sea. The weight of everyone's life is different. The so-called 1,000 immeasurable souls means that even if there are thousands of lives, they don't have a trace of weight. One soul suppresses the sea means that one life can fill up everything. So that's how it is." Sumo took a deep breath. At this moment, the entire eye of the wind wheel was temporarily sealed by the plain-clothed female cultivator's gray light. Thus, all of the white light gathered on the copper plate. 1, 10,000, 100 million. The white light continued to condense into a circle. Gradually, a white ball of light appeared on the wheel, and that ball of light became bigger and bigger. Then, it actually changed color. From white, it became 3 colors. From 3 colors, it became 7 colors. And then, all the way until it became multicolored, mysterious, and illusory. An unknown amount of time passed. Neither Sumo nor the plain-clothed female cultivator said anything. However, gradually, Sumo's frown became deeper and deeper, because the current appearance of the ball of light seemed to be the shape of a galaxy. It was clearly a mini-galaxy ball, and at this moment, one side of the weight was slowly lifted. Finally, they reached a balance. "Enough?" Sumo asked. "Yes." The plain-clothed female cultivator's expression was calm. However, at the same time, Sumo discovered that the world around him no longer had any white light, and the starlight that he could see in the distance earlier had also been completely annihilated. "How many lives are there?" Sumo asked. "Lives?" The plain-clothed female cultivator replied. "What?" Sumo frowned. "I said, those are the lives of the galaxy." The plain-clothed female cultivator sighed softly. "Lives?" Sumo was startled, then slowly said, "If we use lives to fill the sea, then what's the point?" "That's right." The plain-clothed female cultivator nodded. "However, I still have a soul here. It might be able to fill the sea, Who? Sumo asked. In fact, he already had a vague guess in his heart, but he still couldn't help but ask. He didn't want it to be the result that he predicted. "Look!" The plain-clothed female cultivator waved her hand. Looking again, a figure appeared out of thin air in the void. It was a green-clothed female with a cold temperament, extraordinary and refined. Between her eyebrows, there was a plum blossom mark. As soon as she appeared, the entire void was filled with a faint fragrance. "Wu Air!" Sumo's expression changed, because it was not an illusion, but a real existence. "Xiaolang, long time no see." Wu Air's face was filled with endless joy, but also a bit reserved, because she saw the plain-clothed female cultivator. Sumo leaped up, heading straight for Wu Air. However, his body was fixed in place by the plain-clothed female cultivator in midair. "Demon King, please don't be impatient. You haven't made a choice. How can you approach her?" The plain-clothed female cultivator said. At the same time, she pushed outwards with one hand. Plum Blossom 5 Air directly landed on the side of the Lotus World scale that held the weight. At this time, that weight disappeared. However, the scale did not move at all. So, Plum Blossom 5 Air was equivalent to all lives. Chapter 877. The heavenly scale is equal, and Wu Air is equal to all living beings. Sumo stood in the void in a daze, her expression complicated. "Why is it like this?" "Senior, Wu Air is just a plum blossom spirit. How could she be equal to all living beings?" Sumo turned to look at the female cultivator, somewhat doubtful. "This is the choice of the heavenly scale of the Lotus Realm," the female cultivator said. But Sumo frowned and wanted to say something, "Because she is entangled with you by karma." The female cultivator interrupted Sumo's words. "Aren't AMU and Shun Yin sealed together? Wu Air is a part of you, perhaps even the most important part. That's why she could be equal to all living beings. Then what do we do now? Sumo asked. Now it's time for you to make a choice. This is your test. The female cultivator said. All living beings and Wu air can fill the ocean eye. Either you choose to give up on all living beings, or you choose to give up on Wu air. Your choice will determine their future. This is an illusion. Sumo shook her head and then said with certainty. Hee. The female cultivator also shook her head. Demon King, at your level of cultivation, if you're still entangled with reality and illusion and reality, then I'm afraid you will never reach the Lotus Realm. Sumo raised her eyebrows and did not speak, because the female cultivator was right. At this moment, whether it was reality or illusion, it was actually a test of Sumo's state of mind. All of this had nothing to do with reality or illusion. Reality was illusion. Illusion was also reality. This test was a test of Sumo's state of mind. If that's the case, I am willing to replace Wu air. Sumo's expression was solemn, her voice low. Me and AMU, one positive and one negative, are both lotus souls. Then if AMU can fill the sea, of course I can too. Hee. The female cultivator shook her head again and laughed. Of course not. Demon King, this test is for you to choose between all living beings and Wu air. You're not one of them. Besides, both you and AMU are filling the sea. Who's going to restore the galaxy? Of course, if you don't want the Three Realms galaxy to be reborn, that's another matter. The plain-clothed female cultivator looked at Sumo. Make your choice. Demon King, I'll give you the time it takes for a stick of incense to burn. Before the incense is extinguished, you must make a choice. Otherwise, you'll be trapped in this world. You should understand that this is a world you can't leave. Sumo's eyes narrowed, because before, he really couldn't leave this world. Looking again, the plain-clothed female cultivator waved her hand. A long purple incense stick appeared in front of Sumo. The stick of incense was only as thick as a thumb, about 3 feet high, and it had already been lit. The smell of smoke rose in spirals, and the waves surged. At this time, Sumo and the scale seemed to be separated by a misty world. Wu stood on the copper plate with a blank expression, because she could no longer see Sumo. She didn't even know where she was or where she was. Xiaolang, Xiaolang. Wu looked left and right, calling out at the same time. Unfortunately, she couldn't get out of the copper plate, nor could she hear any response. However, Sumo was able to see and hear them. Each of Wu's calls clearly fell into Sumo's ears. Sumo's face was slightly pale, but he was firmly fixed. He wanted to break through the layers of obstruction and fly to Wu's side, but he couldn't. Chi, chi, chi. In fact, the burning of the purple incense stick made no sound at all. However, in Sumo's ears, there was an ear-piercing sound. That stick of incense seemed to burn Sumo's heart. At this time, the copper plate on the other side showed the lights of tens of thousands of households, the joy of the mortal world. Some were reading, some were farming, some were listening to the rain, some were bathing in the wind, some were smiling, some were crying bitterly. Of course, some died, some lived. In fact, these were all extremely ordinary scenes in the mortal world. However, at this time, when it appeared on the Lotus World scale, it was actually so intoxicating. The process of life was actually the most beautiful existence in vast universe. Those scenes similarly pierced Sumo's heart. The incense stick had already burned halfway. Sumo's eyes were somewhat blood red, because that was really a choice that wanted to cut open her entire heart and shred it into pieces. In one hand was all living beings, in the other was true love. In fact, if there was really another choice, Sumo was really willing to use his body to fill the sea, not letting down the common people, not letting down his love. Could it be that there was no method in this world that was perfect for both? Demon King, there is no method in this world that is perfect for both. The cloth-clothed female cultivator seemed to understand Sumo's thoughts. Here, you have to choose. If it is perfect for both, it is against the rules. Yes. Sumo nodded heavily. He understood the cloth-clothed female cultivator's words. She had to choose one of the two, and she could only choose one. Phew. Sumo let out a turbid breath. Demon King, you actually already have an answer in your heart, right? The cloth-clothed female cultivator said lightly. However, don't forget your purpose in coming to the Kuin Butterfly Star Ocean. In theory, as long as you choose all living beings, you can reunite with Wu Air. Hee hee. Sumo smiled helplessly. Senior, of course I know my purpose in coming to the Kuin Butterfly Star Ocean. I'm here to find Wu Air. Then give up on all living beings. The cloth-clothed female cultivator said. Then, reunite with Wu Air. Those living beings, actually one day, you can become a lotus warrior and then plant lotuses. You can have even more new living beings. Then it's not the Star River. Sumo let out a long sigh. Then give up on Wu Air. The cloth-clothed female cultivator said again. After all, if you want, you can have countless plum blossom spirits. You can even have many worlds. But in all the worlds, there is only one Wu Air. Sumo said again. She is unique. Hee hee. The cloth-clothed female cultivator shook her head and did not say anything else. She did not want to disturb Sumo. She only hoped that Sumo had his own answer. The incense continued to burn. The specks of light were insignificant in the void. However, it burned very quickly. At least from Sumo's point of view, it burned very quickly. 7 inches, 5 inches, 3 inches, the sizzling sound lingered in his heart. Sumo's face was already somewhat pale. In fact, he already had an answer in his heart. However, this kind of choice was simply a kind of torment. Sumo had not suffered that kind of torment in a long time. In all the worlds, he had experienced countless tribulations, but there were still some that he could not overcome. Xiao Huang once said, in his heart, Yu Luo was more important than all living beings. The moment he heard those words, Sumo had once cursed him for being a vile creature. However, at this moment, he seemed to somewhat understand Xiao Huang's feelings. Some people, in your heart, are really comparable to all living beings. At this moment, Sumo actually wanted to praise Xiao Huang for his love and courage, for his determination without hesitation. He, Xiao Huang. Sumo could not help but mutter to himself. However, Sumo took a deep breath. Because he was not Xiao Huang. He was the demon king of the 3 realms. He was the nether sovereign. He was a lotus soul of the 3 realms galaxy. Chi. The incense was about to burn out. Sumo closed his eyes and said in a low voice, I leave behind all living beings. Boom! As soon as Sumo's voice fell, the tin and copper plates suddenly flipped. The gray light covering the cloth-clothed female cultivator had already dispersed. Plum Blossom 5, Er's body fell straight into the eye of the wind wheel. Xiaolang. That was Wu Er's final cry. Wu Er. Sumo's eyes snapped open, his face deathly pale. At the same time, his body flew up. In that instant, he actually broke free of the cloth-clothed female cultivator's restraint. Sumo immediately grabbed Wu Er's hand, just like before. Whoosh, whoosh. However, the whirlpool could not be stopped. 2 figures, one green and one white, were swept into the eye of the wind wheel. In the void, the cloth-clothed female cultivator's helpless sigh came. Chapter 878. Through life and death, he would live up to his feelings. Although Sumo chose to leave all living beings behind, the moment Wu Air fell into the eye of the wind wheel, he almost couldn't control himself. So, he chose to hold Wu Air's hand. At that moment, he was willing to fill the sea with Wu Air. Perhaps this could be considered living up to all living beings, living up to his true love. Whoosh, whoosh. As the two jumped in, the eye of the wind wheel suddenly closed. The black vortex instantly disappeared. At that moment, in the void, opposite of the cloth-clothed female cultivator, another cloth-clothed female cultivator appeared. The two of them were almost identical, but the female cultivator who came out later had a hatchet at her waist. You knew this would be the result, right? The cloth-clothed female cultivator said. Huh. The cloth-clothed female cultivator shook her head with a bitter smile. How would I know? That's just what Wu Er predicted. In fact, he didn't want to abandon all living beings in Wu Er. But I made him choose one. That's why he chose the greater good of all living beings. Perhaps this is the Demon King's charm. The cloth-clothed female cultivator nodded. Sigh. The cloth-clothed female cultivator sighed again and waved her hand. Looking again, the Lotus World scale suddenly dissipated. At this moment, there was no sea or galaxy around them. The place they were in was just a part of the starry sky between the Kuan Butterfly Barrier and the Kuan Butterfly Star Ocean. Looking into the distance, the stars were shining brightly. The Demon King and Wu Air are about to reunite. Our mission is basically complete. The cloth-clothed female cultivator with a hatchet at her waist smiled. We're finally close to completion. The cloth-clothed female cultivator nodded and took a step forward, directly merging with the hatchet cloth-clothed female cultivator. She was just a clone, chaotic, unable to distinguish between things. Sumo leaped up and grabbed Wu Air's hand, but that was only for an instant. At first, he could still feel the warmth of Wu Air's hand. But later, that hand gradually turned cold. Sumo felt like he wasn't grabbing a hand, but a block of ice. Wu Air! Wu Air! Sumo couldn't see anything around him, so he called out anxiously like a nightmare. However, he didn't get a response. Sumo really wanted to pull Wu Air into her arms, but she seemed to have no strength at all. A feeling of exhaustion and powerlessness took over Sumo's body and mind. Sumo couldn't see her surroundings clearly. It was like the most primitive state of chaos, and Sumo seemed to have been born again in the chaos. Time and space had lost their meaning. However, Sumo knew that she was sinking. However, he did not know how long this process would take. He only made himself hold Wu Air's hand tightly, using all the strength he still had. Although, that hand no longer had any warmth. Was this really just a test? Or could it be that everything had already solidified into reality, and he had already filled up the eye of the wind wheel of the Milky Way? Sumo asked herself in her heart. But no matter what, at that moment, Sumo's mood began to gradually calm down. In front of the Lotus World, choosing to leave all living beings behind, Sumo could be at ease. Leaping up and holding Wu Air's hand, Sumo could also be at ease. No regrets. So, Sumo simply closed his eyes. At that moment, he was willing to think of nothing, to do nothing. This seemed to be the calmest moment Sumo had ever experienced in his many tens of thousands of years. This moment, perhaps it was only an instant, or it could have been 10,000 years. Sumo could temporarily enjoy it. Whoosh, whoosh. However, unknowingly, Sumo felt that there was an indescribable power surging in his Dan-si, and that power was getting stronger and stronger. In the center of his Dan-si, there was actually a whirlpool forming. It was somewhat similar to the sea and whirlpool he saw before. Inside his Dan-si, there was gradually a huge wave. It was an extremely surging power, but all the power began to converge into that whirlpool. However, that whirlpool was not black but gold. That was not the eye of the wind wheel. Although all of this was happening inside his body, Sumo did not know it was happening. His Dan-si was expanding infinitely, and the golden whirlpool in the center was also expanding. It was like the mouth of a giant golden beast, about to devour everything. Whoosh, whoosh. The power was endless, surging without end. Sumo did not know how long that feeling lasted. It seemed to be an extremely long process, because he saw that the sky above his Dan-si had turned from green to yellow, and then from yellow to blue. It seemed to be the passing of time. The scene in his Dan-si seemed to be still, but in reality, it was always moving. Boom! Whoosh! Suddenly, there was a sound like muffled thunder. Looking again, Sumo's entire Dan-si had become a whirlpool. The sea was gone. Only the whirlpool remained. Then, in that whirlpool, layers of huge waves began to surge upwards. They surged unceasingly, as if they were piling up lotus platforms. And on those lotus platforms, many images flashed. Those images were all of Sumo, but they were all of his appearances in the Three Realms galaxy. Xiao Luo in white, Murong Huang in black, the demon lord who had devoured Lihan's body, and the dark lord who had broken through all the seals. Those were the different bodies of Sumo in the Three Realms galaxy. They appeared one by one, then disappeared one by one. It was all like a dream. However, Every journey was a story that could not be erased. Whoosh, boom. Sumo felt his soul trembling uncontrollably. All the power was awakening. As the past him appeared and disappeared one by one, the golden whirlpool finally collapsed. For a moment, Sumo felt like his body was about to explode. The surging power was stronger than the Milky Way. Boom! Crack! Boom! In the depths of his Dan's sea, a loud sound rolled. All the power began to pour into Sumo's limbs and bones. This process also took an unknown amount of time. Sumo's cultivation level continued to rise. The feeling of powerlessness and exhaustion just now was disappearing. That was the last awakened power in Sumo's body. Actually, it was the power that had always been hidden in Sumo's body. That was the power of a peak venerable. It had always belonged to Sumo. Back then, when Sumo almost died fighting Chi Wu Hue, this power had awakened once. Now, he had once again triggered this power. Therefore, this was the second awakening and also the last. Return all the power he had. 4th tier venerable, 5th tier venerable, 6th tier venerable, whoosh. Sumo finally felt that he was no longer falling. At the same time, his Dan's sea also calmed down. But there was still a small whirlpool in the center of his Dan's sea. Peak venerable. Then, Sumo suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze was like lightning. At that moment, he was the real Dark Lord. Sumo's first glance was at his right hand. However, what he was holding in his hand wasn't Wu Air at all, but a plum branch with ice on it. Thus, he frowned and looked up. Not far away was the Plum Blossom Hut. Chapter 879. Small Plum Blossom House. Sumo never expected that he would see the small Plum Blossom House when he opened his eyes. It was like he didn't expect that he could fully awaken his power after entering the eye of the wind wheel. In a trance, it was like a great dream. He didn't know how long had passed in the dream. In his right hand, the ice plum branch was curved and beautiful, but it was not Wu-er. Sumo waved his hand and put the cold plum branch into the cosmos bag. Then, he looked at the world around him again. Did he not pass the test? Or was he still in the test? However, he had awakened all his power. Didn't he return to the original point? However, when Sumo looked carefully again, he saw some clues. This small Plum Blossom House was not exactly the same as what he saw in the Xing River world, or the illusion just now, because there were continuous mountains in the distance. There were no ancient villages here, nor the sea. Moreover, the spiritual energy here was extremely special. That was not the aura of the Xing River world. Sumo's heart skipped a beat. This was not the Xing River world. But where was this? Sumo wanted to spread out his divine sense. However, there was always an inexplicable force suppressing his divine sense. That force came from the world in front of him. The level of this space was quite high. So, Sumo walked forward slowly. After all, the small Plum Blossom House was not far away. In the distance, he had already seen the 4 ugly words on the blue stone. That was definitely Wu-er's handwriting. In the past, Wu deliberately wrote it like that. The small Plum Blossom House. The 4 words were full of childlike interest. Sumo moved forward, his heart full of doubts. After all, the previous female cultivator in plain clothes did not appear again. Until now, Sumo was not quite sure whether he had made out of the game. Since arriving near the Kuin Butterfly Star Sea, everything seemed to be out of Sumo's control. The Lotus Warrior was an existence that the current Sumo could not reach. Walking forward, it was only 7 or 8 feet away. Sumo had already seen the fence door of the small Plum Blossom House. In the fence yard, the ancient plum blossom was towering. That plum blossom was even taller and more luxuriant than the ones in the Xingyi world. The bamboo building and the bridge were exactly the same. Sumo stepped forward and went straight to the fence gate. However, at this moment, 2 figures suddenly appeared in front of the fence, one tall and one short. They were 2 gray-robed cultivators. Not only was one of them tall and one short, but one of them was fat and one of them was thin. They looked rather comical when they stood together. However, their eyes were clear and bright, and their expressions were calm. As soon as the 2 gray-robed cultivators appeared, Sumo was taken aback. Because Sumo knew these 2 people, Huang Zhe and Deng Feng. They were the two senior brothers who took care of Sumo after she joined the Five Wheels. However, they had all mysteriously disappeared afterwards. Sumo had never imagined that he would see the two of them here, and that they were already at the third level of the Eternal Realm. This shouldn't be an illusion. Senior brother Huang, senior brother Deng, Sumo exclaimed. Then he bowed slightly to Huang Zhe and Deng Feng. Demon King, you're welcome. The two of them returned the greeting, but it was still Huang Zhe who spoke. In your previous reincarnation, Demon King didn't forget. That was the greatest kindness. We brothers have been waiting for you for a long time. Oh, Sumo was stunned. Senior brothers, what is this place? Am I still in the test? Oh, ha! Huang Zhe and Deng Feng couldn't help but laugh. Demon King, everything here is real, Huang Zhe said. You have passed the third test. However, you stayed in the space tunnel for some years. Now this is the Kuan Butterfly Mystic Land. This is the Kuan Butterfly Mystic Land? Sumo couldn't believe it. That's right, Huang Zhe said. What the hell is going on? Where's the plain-clothed female cultivator who set up the trap for me? Sumo asked. How long did I stay in the space tunnel? Demon King, come with us. You'll understand everything in a while. Huang Zhe and Deng Feng extended their hands in invitation. Then, they turned and opened the fence gate. Sumo was puzzled, but she didn't ask. She followed the two of them closely. They walked past the bamboo house and crossed the small bridge. They actually passed through the plum blossom house and entered a relatively long and narrow valley. This was indeed not the immortal planet of the galaxy. There was no valley behind the plum blossom house in the past. On both sides of the valley, ancient trees towered into the sky and strange flowers and grass grew. However, between the ancient trees and the strange flowers, there were many runes floating sporadically. The runes were colorful and extremely beautiful. They were like colorful butterflies fluttering between the trees and the flowers. What a powerful array formation! Sumo secretly observed and couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Now, he had recovered all his previous cultivation. The moment he entered the valley, he could tell. This valley was an array formation that had been set up by Jing Xian. Every mountain, every rock, every grass, and every tree here were array artifacts. The runes flying in the air were extremely mysterious mechanisms. That was because they were changing at every moment. In other words, the array formation they used to pass through the valley was changing every moment. Such an array formation made it impossible for anyone to break it. Sumo secretly thought that even the current him probably didn't have the ability to break the array formation. Unless it was someone like Seventh Senior Sister, it was impossible to break the array formation. This array formation must have been set up by the Lotus Warriors. He still didn't understand the profoundness of it. The entire valley was only about 3 miles long. It wasn't too long or short. After passing through the valley, the front suddenly opened up. It was an extremely spacious area with a radius of 1,000 feet. In the middle, there was an antique wooden building. The wooden building had a total of 3 floors and was rather large. Its eaves and corners were hung, and its beams and rafters were richly ornamented. It was gorgeous yet dignified, full of ancient charm. At the same time, there was a faint 5-color divine light on the top of the wooden building. Sumo's eyes narrowed slightly. Vaguely, in the void above the wooden building, there was a butterfly spreading its wings. The butterfly covered an area with a radius of 1,000 feet. Its wings were colorful and covered with all kinds of strange patterns. In fact, all the patterns were formed by runes. It wasn't a real butterfly, but an image of a spell. Because Sumo was at the peak of the supremacy realm, he could see the butterfly. Ordinary cultivators definitely couldn't see it. Not to mention other cultivators, even Huang Zhe and Deng Feng, who were leading the way, had never seen the Kuan butterfly in the void. The Kuan butterfly. Sumo's heart skipped a beat. At that moment, he saw a horizontal plaque on the wooden building. Kuan butterfly, formless. Demon King. This is the formless tower of the Kuan butterfly mystic realm. Huang Zhe and Deng Feng stopped in their tracks. From the looks of it, they weren't prepared or qualified to enter the formless tower. Just as Sumo was about to ask a question, a cultivator appeared in front of the formless tower. The cultivator was dressed in black and had a handsome face. He smiled at Sumo. "Demon King, it's been a long time. Seen your brother, Shenlang." Sumo was stunned again. "Hee. Demon King, there's no need to be surprised." Shenlang laughed. "My master is waiting for you in the tower. All of your questions should be answered." Chapter 880. Master? Sumo thought to herself. Is the master Wu-Er? After all, Shenlang and the others were Mu Jinghong's subordinates. Now, Shenlang was in the 7th level of the Eternal Realm. With a faint smile, he led Suemo directly to the 3rd floor of the Kuin Dai, formless pagoda, and did not say much along the way. Sumo was puzzled. There were not many special places in the non-phase tower. Soon, they reached the 3rd floor. At the door of a room, Shenlang stopped. "Demon King, I can only send you here. Later, you can go in by yourself." Shenlang looked at Sumo. Then he rushed into the door and said, "Miss, the Demon King is here." "Oh, invite the Demon King in." An unfamiliar woman's voice came from the room. That was not Wu-Er. Shenlang motioned for Sumo to go in. Then he bowed and retreated. Shenlang left just like that. Sumo frowned slightly. Then, he pushed the door and stepped in. However, when Sumo pushed the door open, there was a big screen facing the door. And the picture on the screen made Sumo slightly stunned. At the far end of the painting, on the vast sea, a white mountain could be vaguely seen. In front of the mountain, there were many lotus flowers on the sea. Some had not bloomed, and some had already bloomed at the near end of the painting. On the shore of the sea, there was a withered plum tree. It seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of thousands of years. The withered tree had iron and silver branches, vigorous and beautiful. Although it was a withered tree, it seemed to have infinite power and could revive at any time. The withered tree contained infinite beauty. In fact, it was a withered plum tree. And under the withered tree stood a man in a black robe. But it was just a slender figure, standing with his hands clasped behind his back. The man in the black robe seemed to be overlooking the white mountains and the sea. Although it was just a background, in that painting, it seemed that the entire world was his. That kind of imposing manner seemed to come through the painting. Under his feet, there were endless white bones. The man's imposing manner seemed to coexist with heaven and earth. On the black-robed man's shoulder was a withered, blood-red flower petal. There was an inscription in the upper left corner of the painting. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, nothingness to nothingness, nothingness to nothingness. 10,000 years of admiring the world of mortals, a lifetime of white bones. There was only an inscription, but no signature. The words were like drifting clouds, vigorous like a dragon, natural and boundless. The pattern on the screen was exactly the same as the painting that hung in Mu Jinghong's cave abode. Sumo's mood instantly warmed up, because he felt that he was about to see Wu-Er. That feeling was extremely strong. Perhaps Wu-Er was behind the screen. At the same time, the moment he stepped through the door, the withered tree in the painting began to sprout and grow green at a speed visible to the naked eye. After a while, the withered tree in the painting was covered with plum blossoms. A faint fragrance wafted over. "Wu-Er!" Sumo couldn't help but whisper to herself. "Demon King, please enjoy the tea." At this moment, the woman's voice sounded again. Her voice was very polite and courteous. Hearing that, Sumo walked around the screen. At this moment, he finally saw the whole house. It seemed that this was a guest room. The furnishings in the house were simple and elegant, simple and heavy. In the middle of the house, there was a long, dark red table made of ancient wood. The seat at the head of the table was empty. On the left side, there was a female cultivator. That female cultivator looked dignified and elegant. She was wearing a colorful dress. Her arms were exposed, and her skin was as white as snow, but it didn't give people a sense of temptation. Instead, it made people not dare to have any evil thoughts. The most peculiar thing was that there was a pair of colorful wings on her back. Those wings were like butterfly wings, as thin as cicada wings, crystal clear, but much larger. Venerable Koendai? Sumo could tell that the other party was a ninth-stage venerable at a glance, and she was undoubtedly from the Koendai clan. On the table, there were all kinds of tea sets, and at the same time there was a chessboard, black and white crisscrossed, and it seemed that a fierce battle was going on. However, what surprised Sumo the most was the person who was playing against the venerable Koendai. It was also a female cultivator. She was wearing a long black dress, and her skin was fair and beautiful. However, she had extremely eye-catching blue hair and a pair of blue eyes. That was none other than Peacock Yuluo. Yuluo! Sumo couldn't help but cry out. At this moment, Yuluo had already stood up and bowed respectfully at Sumo. Yuluo greets Senior Demon King. What's going on? Sumo couldn't help but be stunned. At the same time, the other female cultivator also stood up and bowed slightly at Sumo. Kuan Wuing greets Demon King. Kuan Wuing? Sumo had never seen this female cultivator before, but he still returned the greeting. Sumo greets Venerable Shadowless. Demon King, you're too kind. Kuan Wuing smiled. Yuluo, why are you here? Sumo couldn't help but ask. Senior Demon King, it's a long story. Yuluo smiled and said, let Senior Shadowless tell you about it. I'd like to hear the details. Sumo said to Kuan Wuing. Demon King, please take a seat. Kuan Wuing said. How would I dare? Sumo declined, then chose a seat on the right side and sat down. Kuan Wuing also sat down. When Sumo arrived, Yuluo obediently poured a cup of tea for Sumo, then stood behind Sumo in a well-behaved manner. Sumo naturally wasn't in the mood to drink tea. Congratulations, Demon King. You've passed the 3 rounds, and your cultivation has improved. Kuan Wuing smiled. Oh, Sumo looked at Kuan Wuing and said, may I ask if the previous 3 rounds were set up by the seniors of the Koendai clan? Hee hee. Kuan Wuing laughed. Those 3 rounds could be said to have been set up by the Koendai clan, but it could also be said that they weren't. What do you mean? Sumo said, there was once a female cultivator dressed in plain clothes who enlightened me in the array. She was a senior of the Koendai clan. Female cultivator dressed in plain clothes? Kuan Wuing smiled. Did she have a hatchet on her waist? That's right. Sumo said. That was my master, Immortal Lotus. Kuan Wuing said. That plain clothes was my master's most commonly used Dharma body. Usually, she would hide in the various mortal worlds of the Koendai Star Ocean and cultivate according to fate. This time, she specially came back to set up everything for you. Us? Sumo was stunned. Of course it's for you. Kuan Wuing smiled. Or rather, it's mainly for Wu-er? Wu-er. Sumo was stunned again, but she didn't ask further. Instead, she listened to Kuan Wuing. That's right. Wu-er. Kuan Wuing smiled. Because Wu-er has already become my master's disciple. She has been waiting for you in the Koendai mystic realm. Those 3 tests were set by junior martial sister Wu-er according to master's request. Actually, the 3 tests each have their own deeper meaning. Kuan Wuing said slowly. However, that wasn't the final test. You were able to pass because your choice was exactly what junior martial sister Wu-er had predicted. That's why Master sent you into the Koendai Star Ocean. Kuan Wuing sighed with a smile. Otherwise, Master might not have allowed you to see Wu-er. Then where is Wu-er? Sumo asked hurriedly. Huh. However, no one expected that the final test would trigger your final awakening, which caused you to stay in the space-time tunnel for 900 years. Wu-er accompanied Master up the mountain to chop firewood. However, she returned quickly. Oh. Look, who's that? Kuan Wuing pointed at the screen at the door. Whoosh, a fragrant wind blew. Looking again, a figure stepped out from behind the screen and landed lightly in front of Sumo. Chapter 881. The white-robed swordsman was filled with killing intent. He looked like an incomparably lonely swordsman with an endless coldness. Sumo was his target. In fact, the white-robed swordsman was a peak venerable realm cultivator. Even in the Izong realm, he was a top-notch expert. Back then, Not long after Sumo entered the Prajnar realm, he was ordered to guard this place. He waited for almost 1,000 years. The order he received was simple: kill the Demon King without mercy. Swordsman 13 was a true killer. He understood that the simpler the order, the more information it contained. Moreover, his master promised him that if he killed the Demon King, he would help him become a Lotus Knight. Becoming a Lotus Knight from Venerable Realm was a qualitative leap. It was the dream of any peak Venerable Realm cultivator. It could be said that once a cultivator reached the peak of the Venerable Realm, there was nothing that could compare to becoming a Lotus Scholar. The temptation was irresistible. Moreover, Swordsman 13 had been stuck at the peak Venerable Realm for 5 million years. In fact, according to the information he received, the Demon King was only a third-stage Venerable Realm cultivator, but he could challenge those above him. Therefore, when he saw that Sumo was a peak Venerable Realm cultivator, he was hesitant, but decided to take the risk. After all, he only encountered such an opportunity once every 5 million years. Moreover, Swordsman 13 had never lost a battle against someone of the same level. He was also invincible among his peers. Whoosh! The light from his sword instantly reached tens of thousands of zhang. The moment that sword appeared, the expressions of Shun Lang and the others changed. They came from the Kuan Butterfly secret realm and were knowledgeable. They had seen Lotus Knights before. Swordsman 13's sword was definitely a peerless sword. There were many cultivators in the infinite realms, each with their own strengths. Although there were not many cultivators who focused on one thing for their entire lives, there were. In the 3 realms, there was Mu Qingcheng. In the Netherworld, there was Bai Liusu. In Yizong, there was naturally one. Cultivators like that all had extremely firm wills. They would spend their entire lives cultivating only one sword. As long as the sword existed, the cultivator lived. If the sword died, the cultivator died. Swordsman 13 was such a cultivator. In fact, he had been nurturing his sword for the past 1,000 years. He wasn't acting cool by hugging the sword, but rather nurturing it. He only planned to unleash one sword, or rather, he could only unleash one sword. If he won, he would live. If he lost, he would die. There were many lights around the demonic arc. Those were not cultivators lying in ambush, but were condensed by Swordsman 13's sword. It could be said that Su Mo and the others had completely fallen into his sword formation. In this space, Swordsman 13 was the ruler. There, he 13 said and said. If he didn't, he said, there. In a way, the sword could definitely kill a peak stage Venerable one. Other peak stage Venerable Realm experts would not be able to withstand this sword strike. However, Swordsman 13's opponent was Su Mo. In the infinite worlds, you won't be able to succeed just because you have endless courage and the determination to not fear death. When Swordsman 13 raised his sword, the sword intent in the entire space was awakened. Countless sword lights suddenly lit up all over the demonic Arkansas. They were like countless stars, glowing faintly before shining brightly with starlight. Whoosh, whoosh, the sword energy was like an ocean, and the murderous intent was like a tide. Even so, Shun Lang and the others did not move an inch. That sword strike was sufficient to obliterate their souls and consign them to eternal damnation. But they had their own mission. But Sumo would not let anything happen to them. Whoosh! The moment Swordsman 13 unleashed his sword, Sumo's sword also moved. At that moment, it wasn't just the sword. There were also countless red flowers. The demonic arc was on the same level as Lianhua. Now that Sumo had regained his former cultivation, he could control the demonic arc as he pleased. The evil flowers suddenly exploded. At that moment, Sumo's heart burned with the fire of vengeance. This was the first time he attacked since he regained his cultivation. Back then, the last time he made a move was when the Milky Way was destroyed. At that time, the entire galaxy was also filled with red flowers. The peak of the Venerable Realm was the power Sumo had always desired, because with this power, he was the real Demon King, the real him. Therefore, this battle had a special meaning for Sumo. Swordsman 13, no matter who you are, I will kill you. Sumo thought to himself, because with this slash, I will sacrifice to the galaxy. This was the first Izong cultivator the Demon King had killed. Whoosh crack, the evil flowers blocked all of Swordsman 13's starry sword lights. Wisps of smoke were emitted between the stars. The sword lights and the red flowers dissipated at the same time. They were evenly matched. The sword in Sumo's hand also became 10,000 zhang long. It was completely different from the ordinary appearance of the Kuan Soul Saber. The Kuan Soul Sword. It was the treasure of the Kuan Butterfly clan. Even among the Lianbua of the Izong world, it had a place. The Kuan Soul Sword was unleashed, and the Prajnal Lotus was an existence that made the entire Prajnal world tremble. Swordsman 13, of course, recognized the Kuan Soul Sword. However, he never thought that this sword would appear in Sumo's hands. In fact, both he and his master wanted to avoid the Prajnal Lotus warrior. Lucidum and Xianlian did not want to fall out with her. Therefore, they chose to attack at the edge of the Prajnal world. However, they did not expect that Sumo was not only at the peak of the Venerable Realm, but also had the Kuan Soul Sword. The moment the Kuan Soul Sword was unleashed, Swordsman 13 already knew that he was defeated. His soul actually only trembled slightly. However, for the battle of the peak of the Venerable Realm, this tremble was enough. One side weakened, the other side strengthened. The white light sword was slightly deflected, the Kuan Soul Sword's light sword. Boom! Crack! The Kuan Soul Sword's light directly broke everything. At that moment, it seemed to split the entire star world. In fact, Swordsman 13's sword was also a Lianbua. However, in front of the Kuan Soul Sword, it was like scrap iron. When the sword rose, all things fell silent. Swordsman 13 let out a long roar. That roar was not because of the fear of death, but because of his unwillingness to accept everything. The sword broke, and the person died. That was the fate of a swordsman. The Kuan Soul Sword directly split him in half. Whoosh, whoosh, in the void, a strong wind suddenly rose. The wind swept away the clouds, and everything dissipated. In fact, everything happened in an instant. From the start of Swordsman 13's sword to the end of his soul, it was only a breath's time. Shun Lang and the others only felt that they were stunned, and then everything was over. On the entire demonic boat, only Wu Air smiled sweetly and stood calmly. Just now, she did not seem to be nervous at all, because she believed that her Xiao Lang could completely deal with everything. She did not need to worry at all. Then, the demonic boat shook slightly. The chasm of white light from before had already dissipated. Return to the Pure Land. Sumo put away her sword and shouted softly. Whoosh! The barrier between Hanya and Chun Luo opened. The demonic boat traversed through the stars and returned to the dust net world. In the unknown land, a cultivator in black sat cross-legged. His back was thin and long, and he looked somewhat lonely. There were a total of 13 soul lamps around him. Suddenly, one of the lamps went out. The cultivator's expression changed, and he raised his eyebrows slightly. 13 is dead? The Demon King has released the tiger back to the mountain. After saying that, the cultivator let out a long sigh. Chapter 882. I know that I still owe everyone a chapter. However, I really can't write anymore today. Firstly, I'm tired. Secondly, the book has also reached the end. Therefore, I won't rush the draft. If I don't write well, it will affect the later development. I will one more chapter today. I'll go to sleep later. I really want to sleep. I'll make up for the 2 chapters 1-0. Everyone, don't worry. There's still 35 days before I send off another batch of high school seniors. Then, I'll continue to write the book properly. Sorry. Good night, everyone. Samsara of the Ichikata will not be updated today. It's in the middle of typing. Please wait a moment. After the content is updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 883. Reunions usually only lasted for a moment, but the wait was a lifetime. In this life, ever since Sumo's memories were awakened, she had been looking for Wu Er. To a certain extent, Sumo had missed out on Mu Jinghong and Mu Hongchen. Either the Lord did not recognize the lady, or the lady did not recognize the Lord. Two people, two souls. Ever since they parted ways in the galaxy, they had never met again. In between, who knew how many tens of thousands of years had passed? However, in essence, time was a man-made existence. Sometimes it could not change anything. At this moment, Wu-Er, who was dressed in green, landed in front of Sumo. She was still that cold and arrogant plum blossom. However, when she looked at Sumo, her eyes were filled with tenderness. Sumo, who was dressed in white, looked at Wu-Er in a daze. His appearance did not change. He was still that devilishly beautiful man. Once, he controlled the three realms, and the lives and deaths of billions of living beings were in his hands. However, in front of Wu-Er, he only wanted to be an ordinary man. Wu-Er, Sumo called out softly. She was even more timid when she was close to home, and it was the same when she met people. At this moment, all the yearning and worries of billions of years melted into that call. Xiaolang. Wu-Er took a step forward. Her eyes were already filled with tears, but there was an endless smile on her face. At this moment of reunion, it was as if all the parting had never happened, and all the pain was gone. Gently, Sumo pulled Wu-Er into her arms and stroked her long hair. Gently, Wu-Er leaned on Sumo's shoulder and closed her eyes. At this moment, they did not want to say anything. The existence of each other was the best way to meet. Everything else was superfluous. At this moment, a female cultivator walked out from behind the screen. It was none other than the cloth-clothed, immortal lotus. She was the ancestor of the Koan butterfly. Looking at the pair of lovers, she smiled and waved her hand gently. The surrounding people had already disappeared. The immortal lotus, Yuluo, and Koan Wuying had already landed outside the formless palace. Master, this is considered a perfect ending. Koan Wuying said. The cloth-clothed, immortal lotus nodded. Everything after this will depend on their luck. Master, will we be in trouble in the future? Koan Wuying frowned. Hee. The cloth-clothed, immortal lotus smiled faintly. Back then, when I chose to break the seal and release Wu-Er, I was already in trouble. However, we still have two progenitors above us. If anything happens, they will naturally take care of it. Oh, ha! Koan Wuying shook his head and smiled bitterly. Shadowless, don't worry. I believe that I have sown good karma. The cloth-clothed, immortal lotus smiled. My Koan butterfly race will definitely continue to exist in the various worlds, as long as we are determined to do good. This disciple has learned his lesson. Koan Wuying bowed deeply to the linen immortal lotus. Sumo and Wu-Er walked out of Wuxiang Tower hand in hand. Outside the formless tower, Xian Lian, Yuluo, and Koan Wuying were waiting quietly. They looked at Sumo and Wu-Er with smiles in their eyes. After all, it was a joyous occasion for lovers to reunite. Sumo and Wu-Er walked in front of Xian Lian and bowed deeply. Words cannot express my gratitude. Senior Xian Lian, Sumo will engrave the kindness of the Koan butterfly race in my heart. Sumo said. Hee. The cloth-clothed immortal lotus nodded and smiled. Demon King, this is all because of your good fortune. If you fail one of the three tests, I would rather keep Wu-Er trapped in the secret realm. I would rather keep Wu-Er trapped in the secret realm. I would rather keep Wu-Er trapped in the secret realm. What you've done has not been in vain. Sumo understands. Sumo said, the road ahead is long. There are still many things that you need to do. The cloth-clothed immortal lotus said, now that you have recovered your previous cultivation, then those peak powers in Yizong world might have to take action one after another. So, you must be careful. Everything in Yizong world might just be the beginning. Senior, don't worry, Sumo said solemnly. As long as the Milky Way is not restored, Sumo will not give up. Even if my bones are shattered and I am beyond redemption, I will not retreat. When Sumo said those words, Wu-Er was smiling the entire time. She did not say anything, only holding Sumo's hand tightly. Amen. The cloth-clothed immortal lotus nodded with a smile, then removed the hatchet from her waist, Demon King, this blade is called Kohen's Soul. It is my natal Yimba. Today, I will give it to you. I hope that it can help you cut through all the obstacles in the future. Master, when Wu-Er heard this, she could not help but call out, because she knew the power of the Kohen Soul and its significance to Xian Lian. The cloth-clothed immortal lotus looked at Wu-Er and could not help but laugh. Wu-Er, you have a husband, but you still miss Master. This is very good. In the future, you will have to follow him to Rome Izong world. There are many dangers that are beyond your expectations. Your strength is not considered weak, but I am afraid it is not enough. One more Lianbua is considered an additional layer of protection. Otherwise, Master will not allow you to leave with him. Master, when Wu-Er heard this, her eyes and heart were warm, but no need to say any more. Once your matters are settled, Master will also want to be complete again. This blade is not of much use. If it follows me, won't it be covered in dust? Such a good blade naturally needs to be used to its fullest. The cloth-clothed immortal lotus said. Then many thanks, Master. When Wu-Er heard Master say this, she did not say anything else. Many thanks, Senior. Sumo respectfully received the hatchet with both hands. That blade was actually extremely heavy to the hand. The moment she received the blade, Sumo's expression could not help but change slightly, because at that moment, it was as if a mountain was pressing down on the palm. He almost did not hold it firmly. The Kohen Soul blade was a top-notch Lianbua. Its power was completely not inferior to the Lianbua on Sumo's body. In terms of lethality, it might even be a level higher. Suit Mo expressed his thanks once again, and then put it away in his cosmos sack. Demon King, I still have a letter here. Kuan Wuing said at this moment. It is left for you by Miss Yi Wu Hui. Oh, only then did Sumo remember that she had not seen Yi Wu Hui all this time. Where did Miss Yi go? She has already left. Kuan Wuing said, back then, I opened the Kuan butterfly barrier and welcomed them into the Kuan butterfly mystic realm. Miss Yi and Yu Luo came together. You began to accept the test. She wanted to wait for you to reunite with Wu-Er. However, later on, you passed the 3 tests and entered the space-time tunnel. Missy knew that you had no worries, and she had seen Wu-Er and knew that you would definitely reunite. So, 900 years ago, she had already left. She said that you had an agreement. As long as she accompanied you to find Wu-Er, she would leave. That demon Shadow said that you had once ordered him to protect Missy, so he let her go. Sumo nodded. Indeed, this is a letter. Kuan Wuing waved his hand. Although it was called a letter, it was actually just a piece of paper. It landed lightly in Sumo's hand. The handwriting on it was smooth like flowing water. Congratulations to Demon King and Sister Wu-Er for reuniting. The previous agreement has been made. This trip will not be in vain. If fate allows it, I look forward to seeing you again. Wu Hui nodded. Sumo looked at the letter and could not help but be slightly stunned. Did she say where she was going? Sumo asked. No, Kuan Wuing said. She only said that she wanted to find the ancestral master. She's a good lady. Wu-Er looked at Sumo and smiled slightly. That's right. Sumo looked at Wu-Er and nodded with a smile. Then he exhaled his spiritual chi, and a letter in his hand directly turned into green smoke. Wisps of it scattered with the wind. Ding, ding, dang, dang. At that moment, there seemed to be a string of purple wind chimes ringing in Sumo's ears. Chapter 884. The Kuan Butterfly Mystic Realm was an immortal abode. It was located at the core of the Kuan Butterfly Star Ocean. It was actually a special star. The real Kuan Butterfly clan, other than those who traveled or guarded other worlds, would usually choose to cultivate in the Kuan Butterfly Mystic Realm. This was the sacred ground of the Kuan Butterfly Star Realm. The Plum Blossom Hut was where Wu-Er cultivated. Wu was already a 7th-stage venerable. Many of her Dharma spells were personally taught by Xinlian. However, although the Kuan Butterfly Mystic Realm was good, Sumo and Wu only stayed in the Kuan Butterfly Mystic Realm for 9 days. That was because they still had many things to do. The 9 heavens for mighty beings like them was almost an instant. However, Sumo wanted to move on to the next step. After all, he had been trapped in the space-time tunnel for 900 years. Therefore, after 9 days, they bid farewell to Xianlian, Kuan Wuying, and the others. Other than Yuluo, there were also Shun Lang, Huang Zhe, Deng Feng, and a few others. They were all Wu Er's subordinates. They all belonged to the Kuan butterfly clan. Back then, when one of Wu Er's souls reincarnated as Mu Jinghong, they reincarnated as silencers. However, their memories would not be erased. Therefore, they all knew Sumo. Now, they were all Eternal Realm cultivators. Actually, it was Xinlian's idea to let them follow. 17 Eternal Realm cultivators were a rather powerful force even in a hidden world. Moreover, they were all Wu Er's death warriors. Therefore, the group of 20 people bid farewell to Xianlian and Kuan Wuying. Sumo, you have the Kuan Soul Saber. When this saber is used, it's like I'm here. There should be no one in the entire Prajnar realm who dares to touch you. If they really don't open their eyes, you can kill them with the saber. There's no need to show mercy. Xianlian said. Sumo understands. Sumo said, Wu Er. Xianlian looked at Wu Er and called out again. Yes, master. Wu Er said respectfully. Have you remembered everything I taught you before? The cloth-clothed immortal lotus asked Wu Er. Don't worry, master. Disciple will remember everything. Wu Er said. Then, did you bring all the items, treasures, and personal belongings? The cloth-clothed immortal lotus asked again. I've brought everything, Wu Er replied. Also, the cloth-clothed immortal lotus wanted to ask something, but she was at a loss for words, as if she didn't know what to ask. Kuan Wuying smiled and said, Master, don't worry. Everything about little junior sister was personally arranged and managed by me. There's absolutely no mistake. With the Demon King around, you don't have to be reluctant. Sigh. The cloth-clothed immortal lotus bitterly smiled, then shook his head. All right, let's go. Master. Previously, Wu Er had been looking forward to Sumo's reunion, but now that she was leaving with Sumo, she was somewhat reluctant to part with her master. Go! The cloth-clothed immortal lotus waved his hand. The hidden world is extremely dangerous. However, you're a member of the demon clan, so you can return at any time. This is your home. Master. Wu Er's eyes were on the verge of tears. Little junior sister, you must remember Master's words. Kuan Wuying looked at Wu Er and instructed, since you have acknowledged Master as your master, then you are a member of the Kuan butterfly clan. Understand? Thank you, senior sister Wuying. Wu Er understands, Wu Er said. The cloth-clothed female cultivator and Kuan Wuying heard this and nodded. Master, take care. Senior sister, take care. Please bid farewell to the other senior brothers and sisters on my behalf. They can't bear to leave, so they don't show themselves. However, we will meet again in the future, so there's no need to worry. Kuan Wuying smiled and said, I'll send you out now. The cloth-clothed immortal lotus nodded. Sumo and Wu Er bowed to him again. Whoosh, whoosh. Kuan Wuying formed a seal with his hands and activated the array formation. The Kuan butterfly mystic realms technique was extremely profound. Bloodline and seal techniques were indispensable. Even though Wu Er had received the true teachings of the immortal lotus, she couldn't activate the mystic realm's entrance by herself. Otherwise, she might have already sneaked out. At that moment, Sumo and Wu Er merely held each other's hands, as though they were afraid of being separated again. Whoosh! A moment later, Sumo, Wu Er, and the others only saw a flash of starlight in front of them. Starlight of various colors suddenly rose. When they looked again, the scenery in front of them had already changed. A moment ago, they were still in the Kuan butterfly mystic realm. Now they could actually see the Kuan butterfly star ocean in the distance. Demon King, junior sister, take care. Forgive me for not seeing you off. Kuan Wuying's voice came from afar, but he didn't show himself. Sumo, Wu Er, and the others could only bow in the direction of the Kuan butterfly star ocean. Then, Sumo waved one hand and directly took out the demonic Arkansas. When they looked again, the demonic ark instantly turned into a large rectangular ship, like a black warship. Everyone get on the ship. Yu Luo, Shunlang, and the others moved and landed on the demonic Arkansas. Sumo and Wu Air also landed on the demonic Arkansas. Then, with a thought from Sumo, the demonic arc suddenly emitted a black light that spread out layer by layer like the waves of an array formation. Whoosh, whoosh. The first move was a spatial jump. Sumo didn't hesitate at all, because they wanted to first send Yu Luo back to the Plum Realm, then they planned to leave the Prajnar Realm. They wanted to first return to the Pure Land, then go to the ancient Lotus Realm. Finally, they wanted to go to the Glaze Realm, because AMU was in the Glaze Realm. The journey was silent. Sumo's demonic arc was not obstructed at all. In fact, Kuan Wuing had already issued the Kuan Butterfly token. Who would dare to act rashly? Half a day later, they left the Kuan Butterfly Star Ocean and entered the former Peacock Astral. However, the current Peacock Astral only existed in name. Another half a day later, they could see the Plum Realm in the distance. Looking at the Plum Realm from afar, it looked like a blooming plum tree. What a plum blossom, Wu Air said with a smile. That was transformed from the plum blossom staff. Yu Luo said, that was your Dharma treasure back then. Now that it's here, it's a little overkill. Since you're back, it should be returned to its original owner. Ha! Silly child. Wu Air shook her head and held Yu Luo's hand. She sighed. I've already given that staff to Huang. It's a pity that Huang is no longer here. It's fate that it returned to your hands after so many twists and turns. Now it's yours. It can be said that Huang has always been with you. Hearing Wu Air's words, Yu Luo's expression darkened. Then, she nodded lightly. In fact, she had also regarded this plum tree as Xiao Huang's incarnation. Yu Luo. Wu Air looked at Yu Luo and smiled. I suddenly have an idea. What do you think? Speak, Yu Luo said. I already know about you and Huang. Now, you're guarding the Plum Realm alone. Although you have a master, I want to adopt you as my daughter. What do you think? Oh, Yu Luo's eyes lit up when she heard this. Because Wu Air was Xiao Huang's mother. Such an identity was a great recognition for her. This, Yu Luo couldn't help but look at Sumo. Huh. Sumo couldn't help but laugh. Yu Luo, this is exactly what I want. Yu Luo was excited when she heard this. She immediately knelt down on the demonic boat. Yu Luo kowtows to adoptive father and adoptive mother. Sumo and Wu Air sighed in their hearts. Then, they nodded in satisfaction. At that moment, the plum tree in the Plum Realm seemed to be nodding as well. Yu Luo, from now on, you're a member of the Xiao clan, Sumo said solemnly. At the same time, he thought to himself, it seems like I have to make a trip to the Southern Abyss Sea. Chapter 885. The Plum World had changed a lot in the past 900 years. That was because this small world was extremely rich in resources. That plum tree had already been worshipped by them as a divine tree. The 36 peaks of the Apricot Realm were all doing well. As soon as the demonic ship entered the Plum Territory Star area, Yang Tian and Fan Kuan led the 9 elders to welcome them. Your subordinates welcomed the Holy Venerable and the Demon King. The 2 great guardians led the troops and knelt down. Sumo nodded with a smile. Everyone, please rise. Protectors, you've worked hard. Elders, you've worked hard. At the same time, Yu Luo waved her hand and released the power of a martial exalt, allowing everyone to rise. Adoptive father, adoptive mother, are you really not going to stay in the Plum World for a few days? Yu Lu turned around and asked Sumo and Wu Air. Yes. Sumo nodded. We're going back to the Dust Realm. Yu Luo, take care of yourself. Wu Air and Yu Luo had been together for 900 years. They were like mother and daughter. At this moment, there was even more reluctance between them. Foster father, foster mother, don't worry. I will definitely guard Apricot Realm well and cultivate in peace. Yu Luo said. Sumo and Wu Air both nodded and smiled. Yu Luo, concentrate on your cultivation. Perhaps, when we return in the future, we will bring you a big gift. Sumo said. Oh, what gift? Yu Luo asked with a smile. You'll know when the time comes. Sumo didn't say much else. Instead, she said. Eula, take care. Who? Hua. As Sumo told him to take care, the magic arc suddenly started moving. In the void, a black vortex appeared. The demonic boat instantly disappeared. Sumo didn't give Luo much time to say goodbye. Luo stood in the void in a daze, somewhat absent-minded. Because to Luo, Sumo and Wu were already very close. After parting today, who knew when they would meet again? Holy Senior, let's go back. After a long time, Yang Tian reminded softly. Yes, back to the palace. Yulu took a deep breath and regained her kingly demeanor. With a wave of her sleeve, she led her people away. The demonic boat jumped. A day later, Sumo and the others arrived at the border between Shenluo and Prajna worlds. This place was now completely under the control of the Qilin clan. However, Sumo's boat was still unimpeded. Sumo and Wu Er stood side by side on the magic boat. Shen Lang and the others stood in different positions on the demonic Arkansas. They had all ascended step by step from silencers to eternal realm mighty figures. Therefore, they were extremely vigilant. Their vigilance was almost instinctive. Even though Sumo was already at the peak of the venerable realm, they still maintained their vigilance. Xiaolang, what kind of big gift are you going to give Yulua? Wu Er asked softly as she looked at the stars that were moving away in the starry sky. Oh, take a guess. Sumo smiled lightly. You still have a way to revive Huang, right? Wu Er's eyes lit up. Because to you, Luo, the best present was Xiao Huang. I can't guarantee anything, but I can try, Sumo said solemnly. What is it? Wu Er asked eagerly. Southern Abyss Sea, Sumo said. Southern Abyss Sea? Wu Er heard and frowned. You mean Glaze Realm's Southern Abyss Sea? Yes. Sumo looked at Wu Er and asked, Senior Immortal Lotus must have told you about Southern Abyss Sea. Southern Abyss Sea, also known as the Minor Samsara Sea. Legend has it that within Yizong, some people whose Tao and soul perished would leave behind a trace of Tao shadow. However, that is only a legend. Wu Er frowned. I heard that it is a sea that only Lotus scholars can see. However, I have never heard of anyone being revived in Southern Abyss Sea. Senior Immortal Lotus has never seen that sea. Sumo asked. I'm not sure. Wu Er said. She didn't tell me if she had seen it or not. She told me that Southern Abyss Sea is south of Glaze Realm, and Lotus scholars can use those Tao shadows to bring it back to the mortal world. Huang perished in Yizong. Maybe he could be found. Sumo said. I hope so. Wu Er's eyes dimmed. Of course, she hoped that what Sumo said was feasible, but she didn't dare to have too much hope. I will definitely become a Lotus scholar. Sumo gently hugged Wu Er's shoulder and said, Huang there's still a glimmer of hope. Yes, my Xiaolang is an unparalleled hero. Wu Er leaned on Sumo's shoulder and smiled sadly yet sweetly. Actually, it was already Wu Er's greatest satisfaction that Sumo could find her. Xiao Huang, on the other hand, was an extravagant hope that she didn't dare to imagine. The demonic arc continued forward. At this moment, Dustluo Star Realm was in front of them. They were about to break through the world barrier and return to Dustluo World. However, at this moment, Shunlang suddenly shouted coldly, Be careful. Boom! Following Shunlang's shout, the entire demonic arc suddenly stopped in the middle of the galaxy. At that moment, it was like a giant ship that had suddenly run aground in the middle of the sea. Fortunately, the people on the demonic arc were all almighties, so there were no accidents. Sumo raised her eyebrows abruptly. At this moment, Shun Lang and the others directly formed a circle, protecting Sumo and Wu Er in the center. It must be said that their reaction was extremely fast. Moreover, they were ready to die to protect Sumo and Wu Er at any time. In that instant just now, Shun Lang had even issued a warning one step ahead of Sumo. Looking again, there was a ray of white light that was tens of thousands of feet in front of them. It was like a natural moat. At this moment, the white light gradually transformed into a figure. It was actually a white-robed cultivator. His body was ramrod straight, and he was holding a long sword in his hand. With a cold glance, Sumo felt that the person's appearance was a bit similar to Bailiosu. However, the former Prometheus sword god had never held a sword. The white-robed cultivator's expression was cold and sharp. There was almost no expression on his face. The white-robed swordsman stood on the demonic ark's white light, blocking the path of Sumo and the others alone. However, the void around the demonic ark seemed to be emitting some light spots. There seemed to be the existence of hidden forces in the surroundings. The peak of the martial venerable realm. Sumo could not help but smirk coldly in her heart. In front of him, cultivators of the same level were not enough. However, Sumo and the others did not recognize the white-robed swordsman in front of them. They did not know where the white-robed swordsman came from. "Who are you? Why are you blocking my way?" Sumo asked loudly. "I'm Swordsman 13. I've been waiting for the Demon King for a long time under the orders of my master." The white-robed swordsman looked at Sumo and spoke in a cold and emotionless tone. However, he was slightly shocked. This was because Sumo's cultivation level was actually at the peak of the martial venerable realm. This was very different from the information they had received. Did they not say that Sumo's cultivation level was only around the third stage of the martial venerable realm? However, why did she suddenly improve by leaps and bounds? One should know that for martial venerable cultivators, it would take them tens of thousands of years to advance a stage. Sumo had only entered the Prajnar realm for less than 1,000 years. How did this happen? However, the white-robed swordsman had absolute confidence in his own combat power. Therefore, he still acted according to the original plan. Swordsman 13? A peak of the martial venerable realm did not even have an official name. It seemed that his master was definitely a lotus sage. However, they had not left the Prajnar realm yet. Who would dare to stop Sumo? Oh, Sumo could not help but sneer. Why? "Sir, if I return to Chunluo, can you stop me?" "Who is your master?" "You don't need to know," the white-robed swordsman said calmly, "because none of you will live." As he spoke, the white light under the white-robed swordsman's feet suddenly jumped. It was like a long whip, lashing straight at the demonic boat. At the same time, the long sword in Swordsman 13's hand pierced straight at Sumo like a white lightning. At that moment, Sumo recalled the words of the cloth-clothed immortal lotus. "Once this blade is drawn, it is as if I am there personally. In the entire Prajnar realm, there should be no one who dares to touch you. If they really do not open their eyes, you can kill them with your blade. No need to show mercy." Therefore, Sumo slowly drew out the Koin soul blade. Chapter 886. The white-robed swordsman was filled with killing intent. He looked like a lonely swordsman with endless aloofness. Sumo was his target. In fact, the white-robed swordsman was a peak venerable realm cultivator. Even in the Izong realm, he was a top-notch expert. Back then, not long after Sumo entered the Prajnar realm, he was ordered to guard this place. He waited for almost 1,000 years. The order he received was simple: kill the Demon King without mercy. Swordsman 13 was a true killer. He understood that the simpler the order, the more information it contained. Moreover, his master promised him that if he killed the Demon King, he would help him become a Lotus Knight. Becoming a Lotus Knight from Venerable Realm was a qualitative leap. It was the dream of any peak Venerable Realm cultivator. It could be said that once a cultivator reached the peak of the Venerable Realm, there was nothing that could compare to becoming a Lotus Scholar. The temptation was irresistible. Moreover, Swordsman 13 had been stuck at the peak Venerable Realm for 5 million years. In fact, according to the information he received, the Demon King was only a third-stage Venerable Realm cultivator, but he could challenge those above him. Therefore, when he saw that Sumo was a peak Venerable Realm cultivator, he was hesitant, but decided to take the risk. After all, he only encountered such an opportunity once every 5 million years. Moreover, Swordsman 13 had never lost a battle against someone of the same level. He was also invincible among his peers. Whoosh! The light from the sword instantly reached tens of thousands of zhang. The moment that sword appeared, the expressions of Shun Lang and the others changed. They came from the Kuan butterfly's secret realm and were knowledgeable. They had seen Lotus Knights before. Swordsman 13's sword was definitely a peerless sword. There were many cultivators in the infinite realms, each with their own strengths. Although there were not many cultivators who focused on one thing for their entire lives. There were. In the three realms, there was Mu Qingsheng. In the netherworld, there was Bai Liusu. In Yizong, there was naturally one. Cultivators like that all had extremely firm wills. They would spend their entire lives cultivating only one sword. As long as the sword existed, the cultivator lived. If the sword died, the cultivator died. Swordsman 13 was such a cultivator. In fact, he had been nurturing his sword for the past 1,000 years. He held the sword in his arms, not to act cool, but to nurture the sword, because he only intended to unleash one strike. Or perhaps it could be said that he could only unleash one strike. If he won, he would live. If he lost, he would die. There were many lights around the demonic Arkansas. Those were not other cultivators lying in ambush, but Swordsman 13's condensed sword chi. It could be said that Sumo and the others had completely fallen into his sword array. In this space, Swordsman 13 was the master in the law. His momentum was like a rainbow, unstoppable, because if he didn't live, he would die, and he had no regrets. In a way, the sword could definitely kill a peak stage Venerable One. Other peak stage Venerable Ones would not be able to withstand this sword strike. However, Swordsman 13's opponent was Sumo. This alone doomed Swordsman 13's tragedy. In the infinite worlds, you can't succeed just because you have endless courage and the determination to not fear death. Her clothes were as white as snow, and her sword was as fast as lightning. When Swordsman 13 raised his sword, the sword intent in the entire space was awakened. Countless sword lights suddenly lit up all over the demonic Arkansas. They were like countless stars, glowing faintly before releasing their starlight. Whoosh, whoosh, the sword chi was like an ocean, and the murderous intent was like a tide. Even so, Shan Lang and the others did not move at all. That sword strike was sufficient to obliterate their souls and consign them to eternal damnation. However, they had their own mission, but Sumo would not let anything happen to them. Whoosh! The moment Swordsman 13's sword was unleashed, Sumo's saber had already moved as well. At that moment, it was not only the saber, but also the endless red flowers. The demonic arc was in existence on par with Lianbo. Now that Sumo had regained his former cultivation, he could control the demonic arc as he pleased. All of a sudden, the devil flower exploded. At that moment, the fire of revenge burned in Sumo's heart. This was the first time he made a move since he regained his cultivation. Back then, the last time he made a move was when the Milky Way was destroyed. At that time, the entire Milky Way was filled with red flowers. The peak of the Venerable Realm was the power that Sumo had always desired, because with this power, he would be the real Demon King, the real him. Therefore, this battle had a special meaning for Sumo. Swordsman 13, no matter who you are, I will kill you. Sumo silently said in his heart, because this saber strike, I will sacrifice to the Milky Way. This could be considered the first Yizong cultivator that the Demon King had killed. Whoosh, crack. The evil flowers blocked all of Swordsman 13's starlight sword lights. Wisps of light smoke were emitted between the stars. The sword lights and the red flowers dissipated at the same time. They were neck and neck, and the saber in Sumo's hand also became 10,000 zhang long. It was completely different from the ordinary appearance of the Kuan Soul Saber. The Kuan Soul Saber. It was the treasure of the Kuan Butterfly clan. Even among the Lianbo of the Yizong world, it had a place. When the Kuan Soul Saber was unleashed, the Prajna Lotus was an existence that made the entire Prajna world tremble. Swordsman 13, of course, recognized the Kuan Soul Saber. However, he never thought that this saber would appear in the hands of Sumo. In fact, both he and his master wanted to avoid the Prajna Lotus warrior. Lucidum, Xianlian, they did not want to shed all pretense of cordiality. Therefore, they chose to make a move at the edge of the Prajna world. However, they did not expect that Sumo was not only at the peak of the Venerable Realm, but also had the Kuin Soul Saber in her hand. The moment the Kuin Soul Saber was unleashed, Swordsman 13 already knew that he had lost. His soul, in fact, only trembled slightly. However, for the battle of the peak of the Venerable Realm, this tremble was enough. One side weakened, the other side strengthened. The white light longsword was slightly deflected. The Kuin Soul Saber light surged with spiritual light. Boom! Crack! The Kuin Soul Saber light directly broke everything. At that moment, it was as if it was going to split the entire star world. In fact, Swordsman 13's sword was also a Liembwa. However, in front of the Kuin Soul Saber, it was like scrap iron. As the saber rose, all things fell silent. Swordsman 13 let out a long roar. That roar was not the fear of death, but the unwillingness to accept everything. The sword broke, and the person died. That was the fate of a swordsman. The Kuin Soul Saber directly split him in half. Whoosh, whoosh. In the void, a strong wind suddenly rose. The wind swept away the clouds, and everything dissipated. In fact, everything happened in an instant. From the start of Swordsman 13's sword to the end of his soul, it was only a breath's time. Shun Lang and the others only felt that they were stunned, and then everything was over. On the entire demonic boat, only Wu Air smiled sweetly and stood calmly. Just now, she did not seem to be nervous at all, because she believed that her Xiao Lang could completely deal with everything. She did not need to worry at all. Then, the demonic boat shook slightly. The chasm of white light from before had already dissipated. Return to the pure land. Sumo put away the saber and shouted softly. Whoosh! The barrier between Hanya and Dustnet opened. In the interstellar space, the demonic boat traversed and returned to the Dustnet world. In the unknown land, a black-robed cultivator sat cross-legged. His back was thin and long, and he looked somewhat lonely. There were a total of 13 soul lamps around him. Suddenly, one of the lamps went out. The cultivator's expression changed, and he raised his eyebrows slightly. 13 is dead? The Demon King has released the tiger back to the mountain. After saying that, the cultivator let out a long sigh. Chapter 887. The black-clothed cultivator stood up and looked at everything around him. He was thin and tall, making him look even more lonely. In fact, he was surrounded by a vast sea of clouds. Apart from those soul lamps, there was almost nothing else. However, the black-clothed cultivator still looked at him quietly for a while. No one knew what he was looking at. However, if someone was here, they would see that his eye sockets were empty. He was actually blind. At that moment, he felt endless loneliness. The world was empty, as if he was the only one. No one could understand that kind of loneliness. Sigh. He let out another long sigh, then slowly walked forward. Above the sea of clouds, he walked as if he was walking on flat ground. In fact, for a lotus cultivator, it made no difference whether he had eyes or not. This black-clothed cultivator could change his appearance, but he didn't. Gradually, he disappeared into the sea of clouds. One step and a whole world. After a while, the black-clothed cultivator walked to the edge of the wisdom realm. That was the place where Sumo and Swordsman 13 fought. The black-clothed cultivator stood in the void and didn't move for a long time. He was sensing everything around him. He had more or less understood what had happened before. Peak of the Venerable Realm. Kuin's Soul Blade. The black-clothed cultivator muttered to himself, Galaxy Demon King, what a surprise. Then, he looked in the direction of Chunluo, but he didn't cross over. Instead, he turned around. Not long after, he appeared on another star in the Wisdom Realm. That star was the last star that Sumo and the others stopped at before they wanted to enter the Kuin Butterfly Star Ocean. At that moment, there were some mountain people chopping bamboo on the mountain. The situation was the same as before. One of them was a woman in linen clothes. Her hair was unkempt and her face was dirty. She was holding a hatchet in her hand. However, the hatchet was not black, but an ordinary hatchet. The woman in linen clothes was naturally Xian Lian. The moment the black-clothed cultivator appeared on this star, Xianlian stopped what she was doing. The corner of her mouth curled up into a sneer. She had predicted that there would be a visitor. The linen immortal lotus put away the hatchet and slowly stood up. At the same time on this star had completely stopped. The mountain people around her maintained their posture of chopping bamboo. Even their expressions did not change. Everything stopped, except for the cloth-clothed immortal lotus. This was her way of protecting this star. The buff-clothed immortal lotus looked at a short mountain in front of her. Gradually, a figure appeared on the short mountain. It was the black-clothed cultivator from before. The cloth-clothed immortal lotus moved forward, and the black-clothed cultivator descended the mountain. The two of them stopped not far from each other at the foot of the mountain. Black Blind Hermit, what a rare guest. What a rare visitor. The cloth-clothed immortal lotus looked at the black-robed cultivator and said, "Why didn't you cultivate in the depths of the clouds? Why did you come to my remote planet?" Ha! When the black-blind Taoist heard this, he couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. Xianlian, the mountain doesn't matter how high it is. The place where your celestial lotus is located is the land of immortals. How can you call it a remote planet? The cloth-clothed immortal lotus smiled faintly. Sir, you usually live in seclusion and rarely come out. Today, there must be a reason for you to come here. I don't come without a reason. The black-blind Taoist nodded. I want to ask, what is the realm of the Galaxy Demon King? The realm of the Galaxy Demon King? When the cloth-clothed immortal lotus heard this, she couldn't help but feel puzzled. Sir, you shouldn't be asking me this. That sumo is the Demon King of Samsara. The peak of the venerable realm was originally his realm. Now that he has recovered, what is so strange about it? Ha! The black-blind Taoist sneered. Xianlian, he has only been in the wisdom realm for 1,000 years. If there was no one to guide him, how could he fully awaken? Personal fortune, how can it be lumped together? The cloth-clothed immortal lotus said, Sir, could it be that you have never heard of immortal ascension in one step, Buddha on the spot? Immortal ascension in one step, Buddha on the spot. When the black-blind Taoist heard this, he sneered, perhaps. However, I think that if there were no special conditions, he wouldn't have fully awakened so quickly. Presumably, it was you who gave him the opportunity. The cloth-clothed immortal lotus smiled without saying a word. Xianlian, regardless of the realm, you are the one who gave him the Kuan soul saber, right? The black-blind Taoist asked again. Kuan soul saber? The cloth-clothed immortal lotus shook her head and denied. I did not give the Kuan soul saber to the three realms demon king. I only passed the saber to my disciple, Wu-Er. Wu-Er? Ha! The black-blind Taoist tilted his head and said, Xianlian, what's the difference between that and giving it to the demon king? You have already released that plum blossom fairy. Sir, back then, I only agreed to help you seal that plum blossom fairy for 3 million years. Now, although I let her go, it can't be considered as breaking the agreement back then. 3 million years have long passed. Is that wrong? The cloth-clothed immortal lotus said. Xianlian, tell me the truth. In these 3 million years, did you seal that plum blossom fairy? You broke the seal long ago and took her as your disciple. Furthermore, you helped her send out her soul into samsara to search for the demon king. All of this, on account of our friendship back then, I let it go. However, you actually passed the Kuan soul saber to her. The black-blind Taoist said sternly, What's the difference between this and passing it to the demon king? Sir, when the cloth-clothed immortal lotus heard this, her face sunk. Who the Kuan soul saber passes to is my Kuan butterfly clan's matter. Could it be that this requires your black-blind Taoist approval? Back then, I agreed to keep the plum blossom fairy because of our friendship back then. Otherwise, my Kuan butterfly clan would not need to get involved in this mess. You should understand that the destruction of the Star River has nothing to do with my Kuan butterfly clan. It even has nothing to do with our hidden demon realm. Do you want to use the plum blossom fairy to make us take the blame for you? Take the blame. The black blind Taoist sneered. I never had that intention. What's more, Xianlian, you don't have the qualifications to take the blame. When the cloth-clothed immortal lotus heard this, she said in disdain, Sir, leave the blame for yourself. Xianlian, the black blind Taoist, did not argue anymore. Instead, he was silent for a while before saying, Swordsman 13 has already died under your Kuan soul saber. The Star River Demon King has also returned to Dust Luo realm. All of this was not in my plan. You should know that my swordsman has never failed before. This time, the Heartless King will definitely be furious. That Demon King's good days in the Hidden Demon realm will probably come to an end. He will definitely not let the Demon King become a Lotus Warrior. Your actions will definitely implicate the Kuan Butterfly clan and even the entire Demon realm. Many thanks for the reminder, sir. The cloth-clothed immortal lotus smiled indifferently. My Kuan Butterfly clan is not the Heartless clan. What does the Heartless King's anger have to do with me? I only know that my clan's two ancestors have taught us, do not go against your heart, and do good wholeheartedly. Heartless King, if there is anything, you can directly talk to my clan's two ancestors. If the two ancestors have an order, I, Xianlian, will definitely obey. Ha ha! When the black blind Taoist heard this, he could not help but laugh wildly. After a pause, a faint black aura appeared on the black blind Taoist's face. His tone also became somewhat sinister. Xianlian, it seems that your demon realm has already completely leaned towards the Three Realms galaxy. However, don't forget that the Heartless King is only a hidden demon king. Hidden demon king? He. The cloth-clothed immortal lotus sneered. What a good hidden demon king. Sir, let me tell you a piece of news. My two ancestors have already prepared to return to the town to live for a few days. If there is anything, the Heartless King can return to the town to talk. Hearing Xianlian's words, the black blind Taoist's face tightened. You're on your own. With that, he did not say anything else, turned around, and slowly walked away. His back was still lonely and slender. Chapter 888. The cloth-clothed immortal lotus looked at the back of the black blind monk and frowned. Because at that moment, the black blind monk did not look like a lotus knight, but a mortal lonely man. He walked very slowly, as if he had no destination. The cloth-clothed immortal lotus sighed in his heart. Lotus Knights also had 9 levels. Lotus Knights could plant lotuses at level 3. That black blind monk was a level 7 Lotus Knight. In terms of levels, he was way above the immortal lotus. But the black blind monk never chose to plant lotuses. Instead, he willingly served Heartless and was loyal. The cloth-clothed immortal lotus did not understand why the black blind monk did this. Actually, he could create his own world and do whatever he wanted, but he did not. How did he lose his pair of eyes? The immortal lotus also wanted to know, but that seemed to be a mystery. Sigh. The cloth-clothed immortal lotus sighed and then waved his hand. Everything on this star began to return to normal. In the valley, life was restored. Laughter rang out. The cloth-clothed immortal lotus joined the mountain people. Among them, one of the mountain people, in a moment of excitement, actually began to sing a mountain song. The song was loud and clear, spreading through the forest. The work was hard, but they enjoyed it. In the distance, the black blind monk also heard the song. He could not help but stop in his tracks and then muttered to himself, Your Majesty, are all living beings really heartless? Or are we heartless in our hearts? Is there really everything we are looking for in the true law realm? The black blind monk had questions in his heart, but had no answers. Whoosh, whoosh. Then a teleportation formation appeared under his feet. Then the black blind monk's figure gradually disappeared. Luofan Town, Broken Sleeve Village. This village was the smallest of the few villages in Luofan Town. It was at the westernmost side of Luofan Town. In the village, there was actually only one family. But this family was not ordinary. It was a rather large courtyard, surrounded by a bamboo forest. In the middle of the courtyard, there was a 3-story bamboo building. It was bright green and would never fade. From afar, It looked like an emerald palace. This kind of bamboo building was unique in Luo Fan Town. On the bamboo building, there was a horizontal board with 4 words: carefree, extreme happiness. Those 4 words were written in elegant handwriting, yet they carried a hint of charm. At that moment, on the 3rd floor of the bamboo building, there was an enormous bamboo bed. On the bamboo bed, the 2 cultivators opened their eyes lazily. One of them was dressed in white and the other in green. There was a crescent moon on the white-robed cultivator's glabella, while there was a star on the azure-robed cultivator's glabella. They were none other than the progenitors of the demon race, Lung Yu and Gu Xing. They had been back to Duanxiu village for some time. This place was different from the Bamboo Zen Star, because this place and Yizong world were not even in the same space-time. Moreover, it was even more peaceful. The cold moon and lonely star could do whatever they wanted on the Bamboo Zen Star, enjoying themselves day and night. However, in Luo Fan Town, most of the time, they worked at sunrise and rested at sunset. Today, he had already woken up very late. At this moment, a bamboo bird flew in. It really was a bamboo bird, green and lustrous. In its mouth, there was a bamboo slip. Gu Xing stretched out his hand, and the bamboo slip was sucked into his hand. Scanning it with his divine sense, Gu Xing could not help but smile. "What's wrong?" Lung Yu asked. Hee. Gu Xing laughed coldly. Immortal Lotus gifted the demon King of Fortune and gave him the Kuan Soul Saber. In the end, the demon king used the Kuan Soul Saber to kill a swordsman under Black Blind, and Black Blind went to find Immortal Lotus. Oh, Lung Yu's expression sank. Black Blind is quite daring? He injured Immortal Lotus? How dare he? If Lotus Scholar enters the battlefield, then the nature of this battle will be different, Gu Xing said. It's just that he asked a few questions and said some ruthless words. Immortal Lotus only told us, in case Heartless makes trouble, we will be prepared. Immortal Lotus is quite thoughtful. However, it seems that no one dares to behave atrociously in Luo Fan Town. Heartless might not even dare to return to the town. If he really comes, I'm afraid he won't be able to leave. Lung Yu said. Gu Xing nodded. There are many people waiting for him in the town. Windmill and Star River should be waiting for him. Once he shows up, it won't be easy for him to leave. South of Luo Fan Town, Windmill Village. In Windmill Village, according to the position of the 8 trigrams, there were a total of 8 thatched cottages. Every thatched cottage was more or less the same. The distance between them was 100 zhong. The area in the middle was considered an empty space. However, there was a dilapidated ancient building in that empty space. That building looked like a temple, but not a temple, like a temple, but not a temple. The 2 old doors were mottled with age. The knocker on the door was even more rusty. There were a total of 3 stone steps under the door of the temple, and they all looked a little rotten. If Sumo saw it, she would definitely recognize it at first glance. That was the Windmill Palace that he had seen before. However, the countless skulls under the walls of the Windmill Palace were dim and without light. Some of the skulls were already incomplete. This Windmill Palace had gone through countless eras and tribulations to become what it was today. However, it was very harmonious with the 8 thatched cottages. Windmill, the former glory and decline, seemed to be fused in this small village. At this moment, the door of the southeast thatched cottage opened. From inside, a woman walked out. She was dressed in a blue dress. Her figure was graceful, and her figure was extremely beautiful. Looking at her face, she was even more beautiful, forgetting the vulgarity. She was Sumo's 7th senior sister, Bai Yifeng. Her current appearance was her original appearance. She carried a bamboo basket in her hand, like a girl next door who was going out to buy things. At the same time, the door of another thatched cottage not far away also opened. 3 cultivators walked out of the cottage. The middle-aged cultivator in the lead was dressed in earthy yellow clothes. His skin was dark, and he looked like an old farmer who was exposed to the sun and wind every day. His expression was honest and sincere. On his left was a wretched-looking uncle. He was dressed in a gray robe, and he looked a little sloppy. He was also slovenly, and his beard was unshaven, and he didn't look like a proper cultivator. There were actually 3 storage bags hanging on his waist. The other cultivator looked a little younger. His face was slightly pale, and his body was a little thin. He held a fan in his left hand, and a ruler hung on his waist. He looked like a scholar. However, his face was serious, and he didn't smile. If Sumo was here, she would definitely be happy. Because they were Windmill's 3 senior brothers. Eldest senior brother Zhu Nong, second senior brother Du Shusheng, and 6th senior brother Lu Tianzhan. Back then, Sumo didn't even know eldest senior brother's name. At this moment, when Bai Yifeng saw the 3 of them, she couldn't help but frown slightly. That was because they usually had their own leisure time. Eldest senior brother raised pigs, 2nd senior brother studied, and 6th senior brother forged weapons. Every thatched cottage in Windmill Village was actually a world of its own. They would usually go to eldest senior brother's thatched cottage to discuss important matters. However, today, they came out of 6th senior brother's thatched cottage. Bai Yifeng's heart skipped a beat, and she stood still. Youngest junior brother, did something happen? Bai Yifeng asked. Chapter 889. Eldest senior brother Fenluan and the other 2 ran into Bai Yifeng. 7th junior sister, Scholar Du looked at Bai Yifeng, frowned, and pretended to be displeased. Why? Is little junior brother in trouble because we're together? That's right. Lu Tianzhan also said, can't we talk about the true Lotus Tao? Huh. Bai Yifeng rolled her eyes at the 3 senior brothers. You 3 could talk about the Tao? 4th senior brother and 5th senior brother should talk about the true Lotus Tao. 2nd senior brother, are you going to trick the Eastern Fence scholar again and let 6th senior brother give you bad ideas? Eldest senior brother, you're an honest person. Don't get involved in their bad things. Huh. Eldest senior brother smiled innocently and did not say anything. Scholar Du held a folding fan in his hand and glared at her. 7th junior sister, do you have any seniority? Why can't we talk about the true Lotus Tao? Fine. Bai Yifeng curled her lips. 2nd senior brother, I was wrong. Only then did Scholar Du open his folding fan and nod his head in an old and wise manner. Bai Yifeng ignored Scholar Du and smiled at eldest senior brother. Eldest senior brother, I'm going to the Eastern Fence to get a few spiritual fish to eat. Tonight, I'm going to tell 3rd senior brother, 4th senior brother, 5th senior brother, and 8th junior brother. What a coincidence. You can come here at night, so I don't have to make a trip. Oh, eldest senior brother smiled and nodded. Don't worry, 7th junior sister. I'll be there. I also have a spiritual pig head. I'll bring it with me. Okay, it's a deal. Bai Yifeng said with a smile before turning around to leave. Hey. Lu Tianzhan quickly stopped Bai Yifeng. 7th junior sister, I didn't say anything just now. Tonight, I'll give you a good pot for stewing fish. How about it? Count me in today. Bai Yifeng pretended to hesitate. Then I'll give you a chopping board. Lu Tianzhan immediately added. I also want a spoon. Bai Yifeng thought for a moment. No problem. Lu Tianzhan patted his chest. I'll prepare a big soup ladle for you. I want the best. It has to be at least rebirth level. Bai Yifeng added. Of course. Lu Tianzhan said proudly. How can your 6th senior brother be ordinary? How can he make a good fish without good ingredients? I haven't eaten fish from Guancher Lake for a long time. Tisk tisk. Yes, sure. Bai Yifeng nodded. That's right. This time, I'll go get a few more so you can eat your fill. Sigh. It's a pity that some people don't have the fortune to eat it. Cough, cough. When Scholar Du heard this, he couldn't help but cough twice and then put on a pained expression. 2nd senior brother, what advice do you have for me? Bai Yifeng asked with a smile. 7th sister, there's an order between the young and the old. If I don't go to your gathering tonight, it seems like I'm too cold and aloof. Why don't? It's okay. Bai Yifeng interrupted him. 2nd senior brother, you're knowledgeable and focused on the great Tao. Tonight, we'll eat fish and meat. It's fine if you don't come. When you're alone, your state of mind is like water, and you can understand the true Lotus Great Tao. That's not right. Scholar Du frowned, then shook his head solemnly. That won't do. There'll be fish and meat, and you'll have to drink. Eldest senior brother dotes on you too much. As the 2nd senior brother, How can I not restrain you? If I don't go, what if you drink and cause trouble? So I must go. He, Bai Yifeng said with a smile. Second senior brother will cause trouble by drinking? How can we cause trouble? That's your reason. Enough. Say no more. Scholar Du's face darkened, and he put on the airs of the second senior brother. Are you still not going to listen to second senior brother? I'll bring wine. Tonight's drinking will be limited. When Bai Yifeng heard that, she was amused and could not help but purse her lips. Enough. Scholar Du looked at Bai Yifeng again, then waved his hand and said, Go to the east fence to get the fish. By the way, tell Jia Shusheng that I've asked him to come and have a chat. Oh. Bai Yifeng nodded, but she did not move. She seemed to be waiting for Scholar Du's words. Du Shusheng frowned. He knew that if he did not say something about sumo, seventh junior sister would not leave easily. He might be able to drink some fish soup at night. Little junior brother is fine. However, he killed a swordsman under the Black Blind Master. So, I'm afraid there will be some trouble in the future. We were just talking about these things. The Black Blind Master's swordsman. Bai Yifeng was stunned. The peak of the Venerable Realm? Little junior brother can kill someone at the peak of the Venerable Realm now? Lu Qianzhan continued. Little junior brother's realm has improved by leaps and bounds. He has completely recovered to the peak of the three realms, and it seems that he has become acquainted with those two old demons. Two old demons? Bai Yifeng furrowed her brows. Lu Tianzhan pointed in the direction of Duanxiu village. Those two old fellows are not easy to befriend. Lu Tianzhan said, Little junior brother used the Kuan soul saber to kill the swordsman under the Black Blind Master. Without Lung Yu and Gu Xing's permission, the Kuan soul saber would not have been given to little junior brother. Where is little junior brother now? Bai Yifeng asked. In the Yizong Dust World. Scholar Du said, I think they will make a move in the Dust World. After all, there are Lotus warriors guarding the ancient Lotus Galaxy. Moreover, Old Bai has not left the Yizong Dust World. Not bad. Bai Yifeng nodded and smiled. Second senior brother, bring some good wine tonight. I'm leaving. After saying that, Bai Yifeng did not ask any more questions and went straight in the direction of the east fence. Eldest senior brother looked at Bai Yifeng's back and could not help but smile. Seventh sister has always been like this. She has always been concerned about the people she has set her sights on. She has always been concerned about little junior brother. She treated eighth junior brother the same way back then. Scholar Du fanned himself and nodded. This girl, if I had talked about little junior brother just now, how could we have fish to eat? That's right. Just now, she clearly felt that we had news about little junior brother, but we did not tell her. So, she did not go to get fish. She clearly went to Guanshi Lake to look for Mr. Run. Lu Tianzhan said with a smile. Sigh. Usually, she refuses to go to Guanshi Lake in the east fence. Scholar Du shook his head and sighed. It's hard to eat fish. That Mr. Ren is actually a good person. Eldest senior brother said, the few people in the east fence are rare and unrestrained people. Moreover, they are all fallen mortal enforcers. Unfortunately, it's useless for us to watch over her. Scholar Du said helplessly. This girl has grown up and doesn't listen to us. Sigh. Eldest senior brother shook his head and looked at the dilapidated ancient temple in the middle of the village. Second brother, if the world really changes again, do you think our Windwheel world will repeat the same mistakes? Absolutely not. Scholar Du said with a solemn expression and certainty. Eldest senior brother nodded and let out a long sigh. Then, as a pig farmer, I will not let down the ancestors of the Windwheel world. Du Shusheng and Lu Tianzhan nodded and did not say anything. Chapter 890. Ancient Lotus Galaxy was in the south of Dust World. To the entire Dust World, it was the most ancient galaxy and also the most powerful. Back then, the corpseless sect was like the sun in the sky in Dongi Galaxy, but they could not really penetrate into Ancient Lotus Galaxy. The Ancient Lotus Starfield was 3 times the size of Dong-E. Among the 4 major galaxies, it was the largest. The Li dynasty had always controlled the entire ancient Lotus galaxy. In theory, there should be 2 to 3 Lotus warriors in the entire dust world, Dongyi and Wuling, but there was not a single Lotus warrior. Legend had it that there was a Lotus warrior in Baihe Galaxy, but no one had ever seen one. The Li dynasty of ancient Lotus Galaxy definitely had Lotus warriors. However, Lotus warriors of all realms were aloof and did not interfere with the affairs of the various worlds. There were 2 Lotus warriors in the Wisdom realm, Lucidum and Celestial Lotus. In reality, they would not show themselves easily. The reason why Su Mo could see them in the Great Wisdom world was because of special circumstances. Normally, for cultivators, a venerable was a king, while a Lotus Knight was a legend. At this moment, Sumo's demonic boat had already left the Pure Land world and arrived at the outskirts of ancient Lotus Galaxy. Li Beihan had once said that, in essence, ancient Lotus and Dongyi did not belong to the same space-time. But now, Sumo could completely break through this limitation. As a peak supremacy, if he wanted to, he could travel through any space-time in a hidden world, unless he encountered an extremely special situation. Ancient Lotus. Sumo and Wu Er stood on the demonic boat, gazing at ancient Lotus Galaxy. Its central area was truly like a blooming lotus flower. The ancient Lotus Galaxy's aura was different from Pure Land Galaxy's. Pure Land Galaxy's aura had already merged with the aura of the 3 galaxies. It could even be said to be half a galaxy. But Ancient Lotus was different. The aura of Ancient Lotus Galaxy was mysterious and ancient. It was like an old man who had many stories and was extremely profound. The Ancient Lotus seems to be really ancient, Suemo said. Yes, Wu Er said. Master once said that Dust World was the last to form among the 4 middle-sized worlds of Izon. Prajna, Color Glass, and Swirling Mist all predated Dust World. However, there was an exception in the Dust World, which was the ancient Lotus Star Field, because Ancient Lotus was born with the other 3 middle-sized worlds. Oh, Suemo did not know about this. Then the ancient Lotus Star Zone is really different. But why is it the only one that was born with the other 3 worlds? Legend has it that it was once a realm lotus. Wuer smiled bitterly. Realm lotus? Sumo said. Yes, Wuer said. At the 3rd tier of the lotus realm, one can plant lotuses. However, not all world lotuses will grow perfectly, and not all lotus warriors will have eternal life. If there's a problem with the lotus soul, then some of the world lotuses will wither, and some will be devoured. World would Dust World if Dust World, Dust Lotus Galaxy would Dust World would become one galaxy. Then, in the end, it might become a star domain of Izong. Legend has it that Gulian was that kind of existence. However, it was all too long ago, and no one could say for sure what had happened to it. Maybe I can ask Li Shui if I see him. Ancient Lotus Galaxy. Sumo nodded. It seemed like Ancient Lotus Galaxy was not an ordinary galaxy. It seemed like the Ancient Lotus Galaxy was no ordinary galaxy. Was Ancient Lotus Galaxy a good example? Could it be that Gulian was a warning to Xinghe? Thinking of this, Su Mo wanted to see Li Shui even more and ask him what was going on. The demonic boat continued to jump. There were more than 9,000 stars in the entire Ancient Lotus Galaxy. Every time the demonic boat jumped, it would pass through hundreds of stars and many small worlds. However, Su Mo and Wu Er realized that the entire ancient Lotus Star field was rather quiet. It was not the dead silence of the Dead Souls Galaxy. It was true silence. The Dead Souls Galaxy had the least number of stars. Not many of them had life. The ancient Lotus Galaxy was quiet. It was as if everyone was asleep at night. Everyone was alive, but they had fallen into a state of sleep. Ancient Lotus Galaxy is interesting. Sumo smiled as she stood on the demonic boat. It's a dormant galaxy. Wooer smiled and said, along the way, we passed through many small worlds, but they were all hibernating. That's right. Sumo said, that's why I said it's an interesting galaxy. Its dormant power should be much stronger than what it showed. Ridiculous. Bu Xingyun from Dongyi wanted the corpse sect to invade ancient Lotus. That's impossible. That's not a battle of the same level. Unless Bu Miaoyan and the corpse Taoists come back. They must have something to ask of us, right? Only great ninjas can achieve great things. Wu Er said, just now, many of the small worlds we pass seem to have the aura of the eternal realm. But they are all dormant. That power is comparable to the Kuan butterfly star ocean. Sumo nodded. Ancient Lotus Galaxy might be like what you said. It used to be a realm Lotus. It was devoured by Yizong after it fell. If that's the case, it's even more interesting. Sumo smiled. The demonic boat kept moving forward. They went straight to the central world of ancient Lotus, the Dali realm. The Dali realm was made up of 13 stars. They were the center of power of the Dali dynasty. Every single one of these 13 stars was enormous. To the entire ancient Lotus galaxy, they were like 13 lotus seeds. At this time, Sumo and Wu Er had reached the outer area of the Dali realm. They could see the entire Dali realm from the starry sky. However, the two of them did not completely spread out their divine senses. After all, this was the ancient Lotus galaxy. It was not appropriate to spread out their divine senses. Xiaolang, stop the boat, Wu Er suddenly said. Suemo was slightly taken aback when he heard this. However, with a single thought, the demonic ship stopped outside the Dali realm. At this time, there was not a single star in a radius of millions of miles. The surroundings were empty. What's wrong? Sumo asked. Shenlang is here, Wu Er said. Oh, Suemo couldn't help but smile. I actually didn't sense him. The secret technique of the Ink Soul Guards is hard to detect, even for a venerable. However, that was because you didn't notice it before. If you search with all your strength, they won't be able to hide from a peak venerable. Whoosh! As soon as Wu Er finished speaking, Shenlang landed on the demonic boat in a black robe. Sumo nodded slightly. The Ink Soul Guards did have their own unique characteristics. They were definitely not a match for a venerable in a head-on battle. However, if it was an assassination, they might be able to deal with a first-stage venerable. Subordinate greets the Demon King, his lord. Shenlang knelt on one knee. Senior brother Shenlang, please rise, Sumo said. Suemo had always remembered their friendship in the past. In his heart, Shenlang was still his senior brother Wulun. Rise. Wu Er's tone was calm. That was because in her heart, Shenlang was her subordinate. What happened in the Dali dynasty? Wu Er asked. The Dali dynasty's inheritance war has begun. 2 of the 7 princes have fallen, Shenlang said. Suemo and Wu Er could not help but frown. Chapter 891. East Fence Village, Guanshi Lake. A greenish-brown bamboo hat covered half of his face. Mr. Rin sat on a bamboo stool by the lake, holding a fishing rod in his hand. He was still dressed in coarse clothes, still barefooted. Most of the time, Mr. Rin didn't move at all, like a statue. Guanshi Lake was like a mirror, without wind and ripples. Inside, there were many lotus flowers standing tall. A faint fragrance spread throughout the entire East Fence village. In the lake, there were many fish swimming and playing. Day after day, year after year, Mr. Rin came to fish every day, seemingly never tired of it. And he was the only person who could fish in Guanshi Lake. In fact, many people understood that Mr. Rin was watching the various worlds. At this moment, Bai Yifeng had already entered East Fence Village, because it was very convenient to go from Windwheel to East Fence. They were not guarded against each other. They came and went relatively frequently between the few villages in Luo Fan Town. East Fence Village was the village that was most like a village, because there were many people in the village, and it had the most smell of fireworks. Many things in Luo Fan Town came from East Fence Village. Many people in Luo Fan Town were also willing to come to East Fence Village. However, Bai Yifeng didn't come often. She was considered a rare guest in East Fence Village. So, the moment she entered the village, someone noticed her. She came from the south of the village, and the first thing she passed was a grocery store. The owner of the grocery store was a middle-aged uncle. He was wearing a somewhat white robe. When he saw Bai Yifeng coming, he couldn't help but be slightly stunned, and then smiled and greeted. Miss Bai, you're a rare guest. What do you want Bai today? Come into my shop and take a look to buy something for your senior brothers. Oh, Bai Yifeng stopped in her tracks. Boss Qian, I'm here to buy fish today. I won't disturb you anymore. I'll come again another day. Buy fish? Boss Qian's eyes couldn't help but flash a strange look. It seemed to be the first time that Bai Yifeng came to buy fish. Then hurry up and go. It's said that the spiritual fish afternoon is not delicious enough. Mr. Ren should be by the lake. Okay. Bai Yifeng nodded with a smile. If I need anything in the future, I'll come to your grocery store. All right. Boss Qian nodded and smiled. If Miss Bai needs anything, just let me know. At this moment, a young shop assistant behind him had already exited the store from the back door and was heading straight for Guanshi Lake via a small path. It was no secret in Dongli village that Mr. Ren liked Bai Yifeng. In the East Fence people's memory, Bai Yifeng had never come to the East Fence to buy fish. But today, she actually came to buy fish. Of course, he had to let Mr. Ren know about this news first. By the lake. Mr. Ren, the waiter shouted from afar. Yeah. Mr. Ren raised his head and couldn't help but smile. Little Stone, what are you shouting for? Don't startle my fish. They're all like dragons. Be careful that they don't fly out and bite you. Huh? When Little Stone heard that, he stopped in his tracks and looked nervous. Because that Mr. Ren wasn't joking. The fish in Guanshi Lake were really like dragons. If they came out, it would indeed be troublesome. Ha ha ha. Mr. Ren couldn't help but laugh. One look, and I know that you're not as smart as the maids. You would never be intimidated by such a thing. I'm here, what are you afraid of? Little Stone scratched his head in embarrassment. What's the matter? Mr. Ren said. Could it be that Boss Qian wants to eat fish? No. Little Stone then anxiously said, Mr. Ren, Miss Bai is here. Miss Bai? Mr. Ren was stunned. What Miss Bai? There's no Miss Bai in our village. She's not from Dongli. Little Stone hurriedly said. Is there any Miss Bai in Luofan town? Windmills Miss Bai. Windmills Bai Yifeng. Mr. Ren's expression changed when he heard that. Really? What's she doing here? Buy fish. Little Shirtu said. She has already entered the southern entrance of the village and should be here soon. My boss asked me to tell you to be prepared. I'm leaving. After Little Shirtu finished speaking, he hurried back through the small path to avoid being embarrassed by Bai Yifeng. At this time, Bai Yifeng happened to come from another path. Bai Yifeng is here? Mr. Ren really couldn't believe it. However, who else could it be other than Bai Yifeng, who was dressed in an aqua blue dress? Mr. Ren stood up hurriedly. Bai Yifeng was already in front of him. Mr. Ren, sorry to bother you. Bai Yifeng said. Young Miss Bai, you're too polite. Why do you have time to come here? Mr. Ren said. Are you really here to buy fish? Huh. Bai Yifeng laughed when she heard that. Of course I have to buy fish. However, I have one more thing to trouble Mr. Ren. Oh, Miss Bai, if you need anything, just tell me. Mr. Ren said sincerely. As long as I can help you, I will definitely do it for you. Thank you, Mr. Ren. Bai Yifeng said. That thing shouldn't be difficult. I just want Mr. Ren to open his third eye and help me see how my little junior is doing now. Little junior? Mr. Ren was stunned. Yes. He is the person who we asked the scholar to help to become a venerable one a few days ago. His name is Sumo. Bai Yifeng said. Sumo? Mr. Ren frowned. Why, you still don't know? Bai Yifeng said. Sumo is the genuine little junior of my windmill lineage. Otherwise, why would my second senior ask the scholar to help him become a venerable that day? So he is Windmill's little junior. No wonder Windmill wants to help him. Mr. Ren smiled. In this way, he has two big backers in Luofan town, Windmill and Milky Way. Of course, otherwise how can he be safe and sound and ease on? Bai Yifeng said, I heard that something happened to him previously, so I want to see how he is. Mr. Ren nodded. How is it? Mr. Ren, are you willing to help? Bai Yifeng asked again. Of course. Mr. Ren smiled and said, World Observation Lake. You can see the state of the world. I am here to supervise everything. It's no trouble at all. With that, Mr. Ren's eyes focused. He had a special heavenly eye, There were faint whirlpools in his eyes. Many scenes on the World Observation Lake were reflected in his eyes. In a World Observation Lake, under a lotus lake, the water rippled. It was the shape of Izong's world lotus. "Appear!" Mr. Rin shouted. Whoosh! The water rippled. In an instant, all the other lotus flowers on the lake disappeared. The scene on the lake changed, and what was reflected was a sky full of stars. Then, those stars rushed toward her. At that moment, Bai Yifeng felt as if she was flying forward in the endless universe. Countless stars appeared in front of her and then disappeared. From big to small, they advanced layer by layer. Finally, the surface of the lake locked onto a star region. In the star region, the stars were shining. That was the Pure Land star region. At this moment, an incomparably huge white city was floating in the void. North Chill City. On a tall building in the city, a beautiful cultivator in white clothes looked at the stars and frowned, deep in thought. That was none other than Sumo. He looked at the ancient Lotus Star region. Chapter 892. Northern Chill City. The night was cold. Northern Chill City was now the center of the Pure Land. Sumo stood on the balcony of a tall building in Northern Chill City, his eyes fixed on the ancient Lotus Galaxy. Sumo frowned as his white robe fluttered in the wind. He had been back in Northern Chill City for 7 days. When he returned to the Northern Chill City, most of the cultivators in the galaxy had already left. Miao Long and Guan Xiong were still there. In fact, it had been less than 3,000 years since Sumo left Northern Chill City. But Long Ji, Yu Qiumu, Gan Tianqing, Yixingbai, Bai Wuming, and Mo Wuhin, and the others had all left. They had all borrowed the origin power of the three realms to complete the final awakening of their powers. The weakest among them was at the rebirth realm. According to the original arrangement, they had all gone to the glaze realm. But there were still a few who hadn't left. Only Linghu Hehuan's true body was left. She could only cultivate again to return to her former peak. However, it would definitely take tens of thousands of years to complete. So, she was still in seclusion. Bu Shinkong was also in the Pure Land Galaxy, but he didn't choose to stay in Northern Chill City. After all, Miao Long was the city lord of Northern Chill City, but Bu Shinkong was the protector of the entire Dongi Galaxy. Back then, he had promised Sumo that he would guard the Pure Land Galaxy. Even though he was only at the peak of the rebirth realm, that was enough for him. In the entire dust world, only the ancient Lotus Galaxy had venerables and Lotus warriors. Almost 3,000 years. The Pure Land Galaxy was no longer what it used to be. The cultivators lived in peace. But this Pure Land wasn't Sumo's final goal. His goal was to restore the galaxy. Tomorrow, he would head to the ancient Lotus Galaxy. Before going to the Glaze Realm, he wanted to see Li Shui. Previously, Han Bingyi had mentioned that the situation in the Li dynasty was complicated. Sumo wanted to see the specific situation this time. He believed that Li Shui wanted to find AMU, and there must be something special about Li Shui. Otherwise, he would have gone to find AMU long ago. What was the reason that hindered Li Shui? There were 4 seasons in a day in the northern cold city. At this moment, snowflakes began to fall in the city. However, all the snowflakes completely dispersed within 3 feet of Sumo. Wu Er came out from the back room. In her arms was the little white pig. The little white pig looked extremely pleased, because the female master was much better than the male master. Moreover, the Dracophant soul-devouring beast was actually following Wu Er from the very beginning. Black feather deity Hong. Sumo also returned it to Wu Er. However, it was kept in a storage pouch. Xiaolang, everything is ready. We can depart tomorrow morning, Wu Er said. Xin Lang and the others have already gone to investigate everything. And Sumo nodded. There's still no news from the Glaze world, right? I met Guan Xiong just now, and he said he didn't. Wu Er said. Oomph. The little white pig echoed in Wu Er's arms. Xing Fei and Han Bingyi left the northern cold city 1 step ahead of me. However, there's no news from the Glaze world at all. It's really strange, Sumo said. Chenluo, Glaze, Prajna, and Hasa are the four largest medium-sized worlds in the Ezong world. Even an ordinary rebirth state cultivator would need at least 100 years to cross the boundary. Less than 3,000 years is long, but it's also short. You don't have to worry too much. We've waited for millions of years. What else can't we wait for? Wu Air touched the little white pig. Moreover, is the vast ocean white light an ordinary cultivator? And Sumo nodded, then changed the topic. Wu Air, did Senior Xinlian really not tell you who sealed you? No. Wu Air shook her head. When Master saved me from a seal, we made a promise. First, don't ask who sealed me. Second, without her permission, I can't leave the Kuan butterfly mystic realm. That's why I never asked. Who's Ezong's lotus soul? Sumo thought for a moment, trying to find another possibility. Ezong's lotus soul? Wu Air was stunned, as if she had never thought about this question. The Ezong world is far larger than the Milky Way, because its evolution is above the Three Realms galaxy. That's why it has so many Lotus warriors. However, Master didn't say who its Lotus soul was. But Wu Air seemed to have thought of something. But what? Sumo asked hurriedly. A long time ago, when Master mentioned you in AMU, she said that the pair of Lotus souls in the Three Realms is much more reliable than Ezong. Unfortunately, why would she give away such a good Lotus? Wu Air said. Oh, Sumo frowned. What does that mean? At the time, I didn't pay much attention. However, based on the situation at the time, Master thought that only people like you and AMU are worthy of being the Lotus souls of the One Realms, and Ezong's Lotus soul gave away its position to someone else. This caused Ezong world to go astray, Wu Air said. Ezong's Lotus soul gave its position to someone else? Sumo pondered this sentence. Although she had no clue, she faintly felt that she had grasped something. If that was the case, didn't Ezong have two Lotus souls? Wu Air, I'll take you to a place first. Sumo said. Where? Wu Air asked. You'll know soon. Sumo glanced at the little white pig. Lead the way. Back to the soul storage altar. The little white pig's eyes lit up when she heard about the soul storage altar. It really wanted to return to the soul storage altar. Of course, it wasn't thinking about the soul storage altar, but the immortal fruits inside. There is nothing more delicious than the immortal fruits inside the soul storage altar. Therefore, as soon as Sumo's voice fell, it had already flown out of Wu Air's arms. Whoosh! A white light flashed, and the little fellow disappeared. Wu Air was slightly stunned. At this time, Sumo had already grabbed Wu Air's hand and followed closely behind the little white pig. Whoosh! Whoosh! One step, one world. Wu Air was in the 7th stage of the Venerable Realm, and Sumo was at the peak of the Venerable Realm. Now, although Sumo's control over that mystical footwork couldn't be said to be at his whim, he could definitely stop in the worlds he passed by, let alone see those worlds clearly. However, he didn't recognize any of the 49 worlds that Sumo had passed by. To Sumo, those worlds were foreign to him. Moreover, in each world, Sumo's divine sense couldn't reach the end. Peak of the Venerable Realm. Sumo's divine sense could cover more than half of the Dust Net world. This meant that every world he entered was at least as big as the Dust Net world. Wu Air, have you seen these worlds before? Or have you heard of them? Sumo asked as they advanced. No. Wu Air smiled bitterly and shook her head. Actually, I was limited by my realm, so my travel in the Ezong world was limited. I haven't been to the Color Glass world or the Swaying world. Later, when I came to the Kuan Butterfly secret realm, I didn't go out either. But Wu Air paused and raised her eyebrows. The world we passed by don't seem to be the Ezong world. Why do you say so? Sumo said. Because they don't have the aura of the Ezong world. Wu Air said. Chapter 893. Ezong's aura? Sumo was stunned. What aura is Ezong's aura? Why didn't I sense it? Those worlds just now were unfamiliar to me, but they didn't seem to be any different from Ezong. Hee. Wu Air smiled. Actually, every lotus in the vast universe is different. Aren't you a reincarnator, who can sense the three realms? Because you're the lotus soul of the three realms. Izong also has its own unique aura. It's just that you can't completely feel it. However, I can't really describe that feeling. I came to Izong earlier than you, and accurately speaking, I'm not a reincarnator, and I'm cultivating with my master. So, my perception of Izong is better than yours. I can conclude that those previous worlds didn't belong to Izong. Sumo nodded, and with the last step, they had already returned to the soul-storing altar cave dwelling. The cave in front, everything was the same. The top of the cave, it was still the star map. The 49 stars on the star map were especially bright. Sumo knew the location of those 49 stars, and it coincided with his mystical footwork. Once, Sumo thought it was the 49 worlds of the dust realm. Now, it seemed that it might be the 49 doors. Every one of them was connected to another world. Xiaolang, what is this place? At this time, Wu Er asked. Sumo couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. Wu Er, you don't know this place? How would I know? Wu Er said doubtfully. Didn't you bring me here? Whose cave dwelling is this? Sumo frowned. This is the soul-storing altar cave dwelling. Sumo pointed at the three big words soul-storing altar on the cave wall. Of course, this is the name I gave it. Now it can be considered as my cave dwelling. Soul-storing altar. Wu Er looked at the three big words and frowned slightly. Those three words, each one was 3 zhang in size. Written in silver and iron, every word was sonorous. It was as if it was written by a divine brush, penetrating into the stone. Those are not your words, Wu Er said. Hee. Sumo nodded. That's right. It's not my handwriting, and it's not yours either, is it? Of course it's not my handwriting. Wu Er looked at Sumo in a daze. These 4 lines should be your handwriting, right? Sumo smiled and pointed at the black stone on the ground. Originally, that stone was on the high platform. However, back then, Sumo activated the mechanism. Thus, the appearance of the front cave changed greatly. The platform was gone, and so was Qingwang. But the black stone strip was still there. Wu Er lowered her head to look. On the black stone, there were large red words. Immortal, immortal bone. Immortal soul. Immortal reincarnation. Immortal heart. The heavens are limitless, and the world of mortals is only for the monarch. Those words even faintly contained a murderous intent that similarly penetrated the stone. However, his words always carried a trace of sorrow that couldn't be eliminated. Domineering, decisive, and mournful. Wu Er looked at those words and was suddenly stunned, because it was indeed her handwriting, and the 4 lines of the poem were indeed in her memory. However, she didn't remember writing these 4 lines on such a black stone strip. The words are indeed mine. But Wu Er couldn't help but look at Sumo with some confusion. But you don't remember writing it? Sumo chuckled. He had already guessed this possibility, because Wu Er didn't remember the soul storage altar cave at all. Yes, I don't remember. Wu Er frowned. She also felt strange in her heart. How could her words appear here? He, the little white pig, couldn't help but look back at Wu Er with a pitiful look. Wu Er bent over and picked up the little white pig with a smile. Don't worry. I remember you. Sumo looked at the little white pig and couldn't help but think of something. She asked, Wu Er, where did you get the dragon elephant soul-devouring beast? Wu Er thought for a while and said, it was in a nameless continent that I traveled to. I don't remember the specific location. However, it should be in the Chun Luo star region at that time. At that time, it was such a little beast? Sumo asked again. Yes. Wu Er touched the little white pig's body and said, at that time, it was in the form of cub, white and chubby and charmingly naive. And Sumo nodded. At that moment, Sumo had a trace of doubt about the origin of the dragon elephant soul-devouring beast. That was because there was an adult beast's corpse in this cave dwelling in the past. That might be the dragon elephant soul-devouring beast that Wu Er encountered back then. And the current he was just that adult beast's inheritance or reincarnation. Wu Er, the footwork that I used just now, you don't know it? And that was a kind of supreme lotus technique, right? Wu Er smiled and said, Just now, I wanted to silently remember it. Unfortunately, I couldn't. Who did you learn your footwork from? Sumo smiled bitterly and pointed at the little white pig. En? Wu couldn't help but be stunned. It was actually Hee who taught you, and not you who taught Hee. This little fellow actually knows this kind of footwork. Back then, I didn't know. Sumo nodded and said, back then, in order to complete the sex mission of 5 wheels, I came to Executioner's Heart Cliff. That time I met it. It brought me into the soul storage altar. I've memorized the 49 steps in one go. When you're on 5 wheels. When Wu heard this, she couldn't help but curl her lips. It seems that back then, you were hiding something from your senior sister Mu. Hee. Sumo shook her head. Senior sister Mu, weren't you hiding something from me as well? Back then, I didn't know who you were. How would I dare to say such things so easily? Wu smiled knowingly. Now that she thought about it, everything back then was interesting. But Sumo didn't think about those things. She felt that things were a little strange. The dragon elephant soul-devouring beast must have another master. Otherwise, it couldn't have learned on its own. Unfortunately, the little white pig didn't remember either. Wu, I'll take you to the back cave. The two went straight to the back cave. The back cave was still the same as before. The stone house, the ancient well, the flower bed, everything was the same as when Sumo had left. The little white pig, jumped out of Wu-er's arms. Then it squatted outside the flower bed and stuck out its tongue like a puppy drooling. With a wave of her hand, Sumo plucked some immortal fruits and placed them in front of the little white pig. Then, Wu-er released the black feather god Hong. 1 pig and 1 bird, each eating an immortal fruit. Wu-er, do you have any memory of everything that happened here? Sugamo asked again. Wu-er looked around, her brows furrowed slightly. This was because everything around her seemed to have touched her soul. There wasn't much in the flower bed, but she walked into the stone house. The stone house wasn't large. There was only a stove for refining pills and a stone bed. But the moment Wu-er entered the house, she had a strange feeling in her heart. Whoosh! At the same time, a red figure gradually appeared on the walls of the stone house. Sumo had seen that red figure before. Back then, it was that red figure that had passed on the art to Sumo to open the front cave. Mu Baigu. But at this time, a light flashed in Wu-er's mind. She didn't know why, but a name blurted out. Chapter 894. Where did this cultivator come from? The 3 cultivators on the cruising ship felt their hearts pound, because that cultivator from the Sea of Destruction realm had been exaggerating. The second prince did have some Samsara-level warriors under him. However, the message talisman they used just now could not summon a rebirth realm warrior. After all, they were just a small patrol team. How could a Samsara-level warrior have the time to care about them? Just now, the Sea Destruction cultivator said there were some Samsara-level warriors to scare Sumo and Wu-er away. However, no matter what, they never expected that the pair of cultivators would remain unmoved. They stood calmly on the black boat, as if waiting for old friends they hadn't seen in years. Could they be above Samsara? The Sea Destruction cultivator thought. However, if they were on Samsara, why would they need to pass through this defensive line so openly? In short, the 3 cultivators on the cruising ship couldn't understand. Of course, Sumo wouldn't explain. A moment later, he saw 3 flying ships flying over from afar. They were similar to the cruising ship, but there were 5 cultivators on each ship. 3 of them wore the same clothes as the ones on the cruising ship, while the other 2 wore dark brown armor without masks. They were 2 one-life, Immortal Realm cultivators. There were 6 Immortal Realm cultivators on the 3 ships, and one of them was a one-life, Immortal Realm cultivator. They were reinforcements, but they didn't have any Samsara-level cultivators. Sumo couldn't help laughing. The 3 ships fanned out and stopped opposite the demonic ship. Their arrangement was very interesting. Sumo could see that there was a spiritual light between them, vaguely connected. It was a kind of flying ship formation between the star realms. The leading one-life, Immortal Realm peak stage cultivator looked at Sumo and frowned. He couldn't see Sumo and Wu-er's cultivation, but he could see that the demonic ship wasn't ordinary. 5 Decay Realm? The One Life, Immortal Realm Peak Stage, Cultivator thought. Because there was a 5 Decay Realm above the One Life, Immortal Realm. But such cultivators rarely traveled the star realms. But there were some who were fearless with their own magic treasures. Su Mo and Wu Er's temperament was extraordinary, and they had extraordinary flying treasures. So the One Life, Immortal Realm Peak Stage cultivator's first thought was that the other side was in the 5 Decay Realm. He had also thought about the rebirth state, but he quickly rejected it. That was because he saw that the two flying ships on his side were safe and sound. Usually, if the other side was a rebirth realm cultivator, they could destroy sea destruction and realm immortal realm peak stage cultivators. Now that they didn't, the biggest possibility was that the other party didn't have the strength to destroy them, but their black boat imprisoned 2 of their flying ships. Weren't the 2 flying nets in the void fixed in place by that flying magic treasure? What? Who are they? The One Immortal Realm Peak Stage cultivator asked. Lord Qianhu. The cultivator from a sea annihilation realm answered respectfully. They claim to be merchants from the astral world, the 4th Prince's men. They've trapped our flying ship. 2. The 1,000-man commander frowned when he heard this, and then cupped his fists towards Su Mo and Wu. You too, don't speak irresponsibly. War is raging in the Dali realm. If you really are 4th Prince's men, please surrender. If you choose to submit to the 2nd Prince, His Highness will treat you with respect. The One Life, Immortal Realm Peak Stage cultivators were polite. Hearing this, Su Mo smiled faintly. No matter who I am, I'm afraid you won't be able to stop me. You can't even get within 10 meters of my ship. Don't you see that the 2 nets are still hanging in the void? With that, Sumo thought of something. He did not move at all. With a whoosh, the flying net flew back and covered the 2 flying ships from before. But Sumo didn't kill them. The One Life, Immortal raised an eyebrow. It seemed that these 2 weren't easy to deal with, but he couldn't let them pass through his line of defense. Excuse me, the One Life, Immortal Realm Peak Stage cultivator shouted. At the same time, a white light appeared in his hand. It was a white spear with a tail of light dozens of meters long. Whoosh! The white spear headed straight for Sumo. At the same time, the 2 One Life, Immortal Realm cultivators on the other 2 ships made their moves. They also took out a large net, but this time, the color of the net was red. Reincarnation level treasure. It had to be said that the One Life, Immortal Realm Peak Stage cultivators had come prepared. This kind of treasure was enough to deal with ordinary reincarnation level cultivators. Unfortunately, their opponent was Sumo. Sumo and Wu Er were still standing on the demonic ship. Just as the spear and the net reached Sumo, a red light shot out from Sumo's body. Screech! At the same time, a crimson figure flew out with a howl. Its clothes were as red as blood, and its hair was as black as ink. It was Sumo's crimson puppet, and it was facing the enemy. As soon as the crimson puppet appeared, the entire galaxy was filled with the stench of blood, because the crimson puppet itself carried with it an endless killing intent. From many worlds, it was a power that could destroy the earth. Whoosh, whoosh, like the wind, the stench of blood swept out. The blood-colored energy caused the surrounding atmosphere to instantly change. The cultivators of the Great Li Dynasty never thought that they would encounter such an opponent today. The Crimson Puppet's aura instantly shackled everything. One should know that the Crimson Puppet was currently at the peak reincarnation level. With its powerful physical body, it could almost fight against a first-stage Venerable Realm cultivator. Boom! Crack! Crimson Puppet waved its hands, and 2 balls of blood shot out. Under its reincarnation power, the 2 nets turned into red butterflies and crumbled. The soldiers of the Dali dynasty were completely stunned. They couldn't explain it, but they could sense that it was the aura of an advanced reincarnation level cultivator. At the same time, Crimson Puppet reached out and grabbed the white spear. That spear was a high-level immortal rank artifact. Crimson Puppet held it with both hands and exerted force. Crack! The white spear broke into 2. The greatly cultivators were dumbfounded by such a powerful display, and their faces turned ashen. At this moment, they finally understood. What they thought was impossible had happened. The opponent was an existence that they couldn't imagine. Fortunately, Sumo didn't let Crimson Puppet start a massacre. Now, the greatly cultivators were like ants in front of Sumo. Sumo didn't even have the desire to kill them. How's the situation in the Great Li dynasty? Sumo asked indifferently. The Chiliarch looked at Sumo and hesitated for a moment. He didn't want to say it, but he knew that the cultivator in white was at least an advanced reincarnation level cultivator. A cultivator like that probably had too many ways to make them talk. Therefore, he hesitated for a moment, but still said, "The situation is tense." Huh? How so? Sumo smiled. The second prince and the fourth prince are evenly matched? Yes. The Chiliarch was a man of few words, so he nodded. If that's the case, I want to know how Li Beihin's army got past your defense line that day, Sumo said. Isn't the entire Great Li realm under martial law? His army is enough to turn the tide of the battle. Prince Beihan has the sacred royal token, so of course he can pass, the Chiliarch said. Oh, Sumo was surprised. He can enter and leave the Great Li realm with the sacred royal token. Of course. The Chiliarch's expression turned serious. The soldiers of the Great Li only killed traitors, not the sacred royal. Chapter 895. Mubaigu. Sumo was stunned. Who was Mubaigu? Wu Er. Sumo looked at Wu Er. Do you recognize the red-clothed woman on the wall? Her name is Mubaigu. At this time, Wu Er's eyebrows were tightly furrowed, because that name had only flashed through her mind for a brief moment. Then, everything disappeared in an instant. When she entered the stone house, it seemed as if she had triggered a memory from the depths of her soul. But it was like a spark that flickered for a moment before being extinguished. I'm sorry, Shaolei. Wu Er shook her head. I really can't remember. My memories might be the same as the Dracophant's soul-devouring beast. They might be incomplete. I only remember those 3 words. I don't know if that was Mubaigu. It's fine, Sumo comforted. The true master of this place must be one of the most supreme existences in all the realms. Only they could possess such a paradise. Hidden soul, Wu Er nodded. Then she suddenly said, Sumo, do you think this cave is a cave for a lotus soul? It's very possible, Sumo said. However, I saw that the green urn that sealed you is on top of the black stone just now. How could it appear here? That blue urn is Lucidum's treasure, Wu Er said. Back then, I used Mu Hongchen's identity to reincarnate. Then, Fallen Star and Lucidum sealed me. That's right, Sumo said. Lucidum also said that he was the one who sealed you. But someone had him send you to the Kuan butterfly mystic realm. I wonder who the person behind this was. Also, did Senior Immortal Lotus say that you were sent out after entering the Kuan butterfly mystic realm? No, Wu Er said with certainty. I can confirm this. Back then, when I was sent to the Kuan butterfly mystic realm, besides Mu Jinghong's divine soul, nothing else came out. What about the blue urn that sealed you? Sumo asked. That was a paragon-level magic treasure, but it has already been broken by Master. I've seen its fragments before, but they can no longer be restored, Wu Er said. From the looks of it, the green urn shouldn't have a chance to get here. Sumo frowned and said, However, I saw that green urn with my own eyes, and I also had your divine soul to guide me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known that you were on the Dustnet star and the Dead Soul star domain. Yes, Wu Er nodded. Back then, I had a brief awakening. Therefore, I hope that a fated person will save me. However, what happened after being sealed wasn't that bad. However, I'm not sure what happened when I was sealed. Could it be that the green urn isn't in this cave at all? Sumo thought of a possibility. After all, the green urn disappeared mysteriously. According to my calculations, you should have regained your freedom in the Kuan butterfly mystic realm by then. The green urn had long since been broken. What I saw was just an illusion. But even an illusion doesn't match. Wu frowned in thought, then said, "However, there's another explanation." "What explanation?" Sumo asked. "The space-time here is different from Izong's." Wu said, "So, whether what you saw was an illusion or real, it is not something in Izong's world at the same time." "That makes sense." Sumo nodded. "It is indeed possible. It seems that everything is complicated. We can only continue to speculate and then look for clues." "Yes." Wu smiled. "However, after all, it's all in the past. It doesn't matter who this cave belongs to. Now, only you and Hung can come and go as you please. I've been reunited with you. Even if I can't remember the past, it won't affect anything." "Good." Sumo also smiled when she heard that. "It's all in the past. Let's not pursue it. Moreover, one day the truth will be revealed. Let's just do it step by step to restore the galaxy." "Yes." Wu nodded. After thinking this through, Sumo and Wu-er's mood also became cheerful. The affairs of the world were indeed like this. Many things were useless if you were entangled in it. It was better to let it go. Thus, the two of them left the stone house. At this time, the little white pig and the black feather deity had already finished the immortal fruit. The black feather deity found a corner, stood on one leg, and closed his eyes to rest. The little white pig directly lay on his back outside the flower bed, looking a little full. Its white belly was round and plump. However, once Sumo and Wu left the stone house, the little fellow immediately rolled its body and was extremely agile. Then, it looked pitiful, as if it was not full at all. Hee. Wu saw that and couldn't help but laugh. "This flower bed has a restriction. Currently, no one can enter except me." Sumo said, "So, even if it wants to eat the fruit, only I can pick it." "Oh." Wu smiled. "So that's how it is. I was wondering why it was so obedient." "Wu, try to see if you can enter this flower bed. I feel that you should be able to." Sumo said, "I'll just follow behind you. There shouldn't be a problem." "Okay." Wu nodded, then stepped towards the flower bed. Something magical happened. Previously, whether it was the little white pig, Guan Xiong, or Yi Wu Hui, none of them could step into the flower bed. Once they entered the flower bed, they would be attacked by the restriction. However, now that Wu stepped into the flower bed, the restriction actually did not respond. "Huh." Sumo saw that and couldn't help but laugh. "Wu, it seems that this place is very spiritual. In an instant, I know that you are the mistress of this place." Wu-er's heart was filled with sweetness. Hee. The little white pig saw that and immediately revealed a happy expression. It cheered excitedly and somersaulted outside, because it knew that Wu was much more generous than Sumo. "Hee. I can only try to see if I can pick the fruit." Saying that, Wu waved one hand. Whoosh! 2 vermilion immortal fruits fell in response. Hee. When the little white pig saw that, its eyes sparkled and its eyes were watery. Wu didn't tease it and directly gave the 2 immortal fruits to Hee and black-feathered deity Hong. At this time, Sumo also entered the flower bed. Then, he walked directly to the bottom of the black cliff. Currently, in the small netherworld, the 7 red spider lilies were intertwined, their branches and leaves covering each other. Among them, one had already climbed up the black cliff, but it had not bloomed yet. Red spider lilies. Wu couldn't help but be stunned. "Xiaolang, how did you find them? You should know that we didn't even have any news of them in the galaxy. I thought that when AMU created the galaxy, he didn't give them a chance to be reborn. I summoned them from the remnant of the 3 realms." Sumo said, "Perhaps they were all born with me, so they came to this world. I promised them that they would come to the human world again." Wu nodded. She understood that the red spider lilies had a special meaning to Sumo. Whoosh! When he looked again, Sumo had already formed a seal with both hands. Now he had regained his former peak cultivation. It could be said that at this time, he was the true Nether Sovereign. Therefore, he wanted the red spider lilies to bloom. The small netherworld instantly spread. The entire area under the black cliff turned into the netherworld. The red spider lilies grew at a speed visible to the naked eye. Immediately, Sumo stepped into the netherworld. In an instant, the entire netherworld seemed to come to life. The Nether Sovereign had returned. Sumo was the only soul in the netherworld. Chi-Chi, white mist lingered. At the same time, 7 white lights shone on the branches. At that moment, the red spider lilies bloomed. His body seemed to have gotten fatter, but he was now in the early stage of the break world. In the eyes of the current Sumo, this realm was like a mortal. However, it was not easy for Guanxiong. After all, his talent was limited. His current realm was not bad at all. Sumo wanted to forcibly help him increase his realm, but after thinking about it, she decided not to. If his realm was low, Guanxiong would not leave the northern cold city. He would be relatively safe. Back then, Hanbingyi did not want Guanxiong to go out and fight. Otherwise, she could have helped Guanxiong increase his realm. She was just thinking about Miao Long. In all the realms, the top cultivators could not live for themselves, but the mediocre could. Hanbingyi and Miao Long did not want Guanxiong to be a hero. Guanxiong did not want to be one, so Sumo did not do anything. What's wrong? Sumo asked. The Great Li army stationed at the border of the ancient Lotus Star area suddenly retreated. Guanxiong said, Young Lady and Senior Bu are already in the northern cold palace. The Great Li army retreated? Sumo frowned. Back then, Li Beihan had led the army to guard the border of ancient Lotus Star area and Dongyi Star area. His original goal was to restrain the corpseless sect and intimidate the Great Li dynasty. Later, when Dongyi Star area became the Pure Land Star area, the Great Li dynasty's army did not retreat. In fact, there was no war between the two families, but Li Beihan did not want to return to the Great Li dynasty. In the past 3,000 years, Li Beihan had maintained a close relationship with the northern cold city. Because of the Li River, they could take care of each other. However, they did not expect him to suddenly withdraw his army. Something must have changed in ancient Lotus Star area. Let's go. Sumo did not say much. With a thought, the 3 of them went to the northern cold palace. In the palace, Miao Long and Bu Shinkong had been waiting for a long time. Demon King, Miao Long was already a one-lifetime immortal. All these years, she had been in charge of the northern cold city. Back then, Hanbingyi had already passed the position of city lord to her. Bu Shinkong and the others had also done their best to train her. They all hoped that Miao Long could one day rule the entire Pure Land Star area. Now, Miao Long cultivation level was still very low, but she had matured and calmed down a lot. She was already similar to Hanbingyi in the past. She had the aura of a ruler. The few of them did not exchange pleasantries and went straight to the point. Demon King, Prince Li only left us a jade scroll when he withdrew his army this time. Look, as he spoke, Bu Shinkong took out a jade scroll from his pocket. Sumo's divine consciousness moved, and the jade scroll showed 8 words. Ancient Lotus Star area has changed. Pure Land, do not move. It seems that ancient Lotus Star area is indeed in turmoil, Sumo said. For many years, the Great Li dynasty has been fighting for the throne. The reason why Crown Prince Li led his troops outside was to intimidate the forces within the dynasty. Now that he suddenly returned, it must be a crucial moment, Bu Shinkong said. But why did he not let us do anything? Miao Long was puzzled. You should know that we, the Pure Land, can definitely lend him a hand. We also have an army of hundreds of thousands of puppets at the border. We can march into ancient Lotus Star area at any time. We are not sure about the situation in ancient Lotus Star area. Prince Li must have his reasons for sending this Jade Scroll message. Most importantly, once our army enters ancient Lotus Star area, the nature of the situation will be different. Bu Shinkong said, the internal affairs of the Great Li dynasty, no matter how they fight, are their internal affairs. If we go in, they might unite against us. Yes, makes sense. Miao Long nodded. Enlightened One is right. Sumo agreed. This is most likely Li Beihan's idea. That is why he specifically told us not to move. But if the army doesn't move, we can't just sit back and watch. My Ink Soul Guards should have entered ancient Lotus Star area, Wu said. If we need to do anything, they can do it. Whether it is individual ability or collective action, they will have no problem. Shun Lang and the others are indeed good. Sumo nodded. But Li Shuai should have entered the Lotus Realm long ago. That means his opponents are likely to be in the Lotus Realm as well. How can Shun Lang and the others interfere in a battle between Lotus warriors? I'm afraid this is one of the reasons why Li Beihan did not let us do anything. But you and I must go. There is no time to lose. Let's go now. Chapter 897. Ancient Lotus Galaxy was in the south of Dust World. To the entire Dust World, it was the most ancient galaxy and also the most powerful. Back then, the Corpseless sect was like the sun in the sky in Dongi Galaxy, but they could not really penetrate into Ancient Lotus Galaxy. Ancient Lotus Galaxy was 3 times the size of Dongi. Among the 4 major galaxies, it was the largest. The Li dynasty had always controlled the entire Ancient Lotus Galaxy. In theory, there should be 2 to 3 Lotus warriors in the entire Dust World. Dongi and Wuling, but there was not a single Lotus warrior. Legend had it that there was a Lotus warrior in Baiha Galaxy, but no one had ever seen one. The Li dynasty of Ancient Lotus Galaxy definitely had Lotus warriors. However, Lotus warriors of all realms were aloof and did not interfere with the affairs of the various worlds. There were 2 Lotus warriors in the Wisdom realm, Lucidum and Celestial Lotus. In reality, they would not show themselves easily. Sumo could see them in the Wisdom realm because of special circumstances. Usually, to cultivators, supremacies were kings, while Lotus warriors were legends. At this moment, Sumo's demonic boat had already left the Pure Land world and arrived at the outskirts of Ancient Lotus Galaxy. Li Beihan had once said that in essence, Ancient Lotus and Dongi did not belong to the same space-time. But now, Sumo could completely break through this limitation. As a peak supremacy, if he wanted to, he could travel through any space-time in a hidden world, unless he encountered an extremely special situation. Ancient Lotus. Sumo and Wu Er stood on the demonic boat, gazing at Ancient Lotus Galaxy. Its central area was truly like a blooming lotus flower. The Ancient Lotus Galaxy's aura was different from Pure Land Galaxy's. Pure Land Galaxy's aura had already merged with the aura of the 3 galaxies. It could even be said to be half a galaxy. But Ancient Lotus was different. The aura of Ancient Lotus Galaxy was mysterious and ancient. It was like an old man who had many stories and was extremely profound. Ancient Lotus seems really ancient, Sumo said. Yes, Wu Er said. Master once said that Dust World was the last to form among the 4 middle-sized worlds of Izon. Prajna, Color Glass, and Swirling Mist all predated Dust World. However, there was an exception in the Dust World, which was the Ancient Lotus Star Field, because the Ancient Lotus was born at the same time as the other 3 mid-level worlds. Oh, Sumo did not know about this. Then the Ancient Lotus Star Sector is really different. But why is it the only one that coexists with the other 3 realms? Legend has it that it was once a realm lotus. Wu Er smiled bitterly. A realm lotus. Sumo was taken aback. Yes, Wu Er said. At the 3rd tier of the lotus realm, one can plant lotuses. However, not all world lotuses will grow perfectly, and not all lotus warriors will have eternal life. If there's a problem with the lotus soul, then some of the world lotuses will wither, and some will be devoured. Just like in our 3 realms galaxy, if something happens to you and AMU, we will not be able to escape. Then, in the end, it might become a star domain of Izon. Legend has it that Gulian was that kind of existence. However, it was all too long ago, and no one could say for sure what had happened to it. Maybe I can ask Li Shuai if I see him. Ancient Lotus Star Sector. Ancient Lotus Star Sector. Sumo nodded when she heard this. It seemed that the Ancient Lotus Star Sector was not an ordinary star sector. There must be a lot of stories behind it. Could the Ancient Lotus Star Sector be a warning to the others? As she thought of this, Sumo wanted to see Li Shuai and ask him about it. The demonic boat continued to move forward. The entire ancient Lotus Star sector had more than 9,000 stars. Every time the demonic boat jumped, it would pass through at least 100 stars and many small worlds. However, Sumo and Wu Air realized that the entire ancient Lotus Star sector was quiet. This silence was not the deathly silence of the Dead Soul Star sector, but true silence. The Dead Soul Star sector had the least number of stars, and there were not many stars with life. The silence of the ancient Lotus Star sector was like a night when everyone was asleep. Everyone was alive, but in a state of sleep. The ancient Lotus Star sector is really interesting. Sumo stood on the demonic boat and smiled. This is a star sector that is in deep sleep. Wu Air smiled and said, "We passed through many small worlds along the way, but they were all in hibernation." "That's right," Sumo said. "That's why I said that this is an interesting star sector. Its power in hibernation should be far greater than what it shows." Ridiculous. Bu Xingyun from Dongyi wanted the corpse sect to invade the ancient Lotus Star sector. That's impossible. That's because it's not a battle of the same level, unless Bu Miaoyan and the corpse Taoist return. This hibernation must mean that they have a request, right? Only great ninjas can achieve great things. Wu Air said, "Just now, many of the small worlds that we pass through seem to have the aura of the eternal realm. However, they're all in deep sleep. That kind of power is almost comparable to the Kuan butterfly star ocean." Sumo nodded and said, "The ancient Lotus Star sector might be as you said. It used to be a realm lotus, but it was devoured by Yizong after it fell. If that's the case, it will be even more interesting." Sumo smiled faintly. The demonic boat kept moving forward without stopping. They headed straight for the central world of the ancient Lotus Star sector, the Dali realm. The Dali realm was made up of 13 planets. They were the center of power of the Dali dynasty. Every single one of these 13 stars was enormous. To the entire ancient Lotus Star sector, they were like 13 lotus seeds. At this time, Sumo and Wu Air had already reached the periphery of the Dali realm. They could see the entire Dali realm from the starry sky. However, the two of them did not completely spread out their divine senses. After all, this was the ancient Lotus Star sector. It was not appropriate to spread out their divine senses casually. "Xiaolang, stop the boat," Wu Air suddenly said. Sumo was slightly stunned when she heard that. However, with a thought, the demonic boat stopped outside the Dali realm. At this time, there was not a single planet within a radius of millions of miles. The surroundings were empty. "What's wrong?" Sumo asked. "Shenlang is here," Wu Air said. "Oh." Sumo could not help but smile. "I actually did not sense him. Even a venerable would not be able to detect the secret technique of the Ink Soul Guards. However, that was because you did not notice it before. If you search with all your strength, they will not be able to hide from a peak venerable." Whoosh! As soon as Wu Air finished speaking, Shenlang had already landed on the demonic boat. Sumo could not help but nod slightly. The Ink Soul Guards indeed had their unique points. In a head-on battle, they were definitely not a match for a venerable. However, if it was an assassination, they might be able to deal with a first-stage venerable. Subordinate greets the Demon King, his lord. Shenlang knelt on one knee. "Senior brother Shenlang, please rise," Sumo said. Sumo always remembered the friendship of the past. In his heart, Shenlang was still his senior brother Wuluan. "Rise." Wu Air's tone was calm, because in her heart, Shenlang was her subordinate. "What happened in the Dali dynasty?" Wu Air asked. "The Dali dynasty's inheritance war has begun. Among the 7 princes, 2 have already fallen," Shenlang said. Sumo and Wu Air could not help but frown. Chapter 898. The War of Inheritance. Li Beian once said that Li Shui was the 3rd prince of the Li dynasty. Back then, he went through a great calamity in the 3 realms. Sumo speculated that there should be 2 more princes above Li Shui. However, Sumo didn't expect that there were as many as 7 princes in the entire Li dynasty. 7 princes fighting? Sumo asked. "No," Shenlang said. "The Li dynasty originally had a crown prince, but he suddenly died a month ago. The cause of his death is still unknown. Thus, on one side, the 5th and 7th princes supported the 2nd prince as crown prince, while on the other side, the 6th prince and the eldest princess supported the 4th prince as crown prince. These two forces are fighting each other. Then what about Li Shui? Sumo asked. The 3rd prince is detached from the outside world. It is said that he once made a great vow not to fight for the throne, but to protect the Li dynasty and the ancient lotus, Shen Lang said. As expected of the sacred lotus. Sumo smiled. However, the reappointment of the crown prince is a big deal. The Li dynasty's divine emperor should have the final say, right? Why would he let the princes fight? Where's the imperial authority? The demon king is right. However, the Li dynasty's divine emperor has always been in seclusion, Shen Lang said. The reappointment of the crown prince was too sudden. The Li dynasty wasn't prepared at all. Now, the two forces are blaming each other for the death of the 1st prince. There are even rumors that the Li dynasty's divine emperor is dead. Huh? Sumo laughed coldly. It seems that the immortal dynasty can't avoid worldly disputes in the end. Immortals and mortals, different paths lead to the same destination. Senior brother Shun, what's the specific situation in the Li dynasty now? 7 days ago, the 6th and 7th princes died. This is a huge shock. If the situation is not controlled, the entire Li dynasty is likely to fall apart. In fact, the two sides are evenly matched. No one is confident that they can defeat the other. Currently, they are in a standoff. They each occupy 6 of the 13 planets of the Li dynasty, and they seem to be dividing and ruling. Only the Sacred Emperor planet is not under their control. Li Shui is on the Sacred Emperor planet. Sumo said. Yes. Shen Lang said. The Saint Emperor planet is where the great Li Sacred Emperor secluded himself. The two great forces fought against each other and kept escalating. However, none of them dared to approach the Sacred Royal planet, because the Sacred Lotus is stationed on the Sacred Emperor planet. Oh, Sumo couldn't help but smile. Li Shui will remain neutral. He will become a force that both sides will try to rope in. That's right, said Chun Lang. Presently, both powers are trying to rope in the Sacred Lotus, but the Sacred Lotus has remained unmoved. Not only that, but Li Beihan's army had already entered the Dali realm. They were stationed on a void continent 300,000 kilometers north of the Sacred Emperor planet. Those are the elite troops of the Li dynasty. But why did Li Shui not quell the rebellion? Sumo's brow furrowed. He allowed the situation to worsen? That I don't know. Shen Lang couldn't figure it out either. Right now, the entire Sacred Emperor planet has been sealed. Our people can't enter. I'm not very clear about the specific details. The Sacred Lotus is no ordinary person. Right now, he's the one who can control the situation the most, said Wu Er. He must have his reasons for guarding the planet. All right, Shen Lang added. I also heard that the Sacred Lotus became a venerable not long after returning from the Three Realms. After he became a venerable exalt, he never left the Holy Emperor's side. Some say that it was because he returned from the Three Realms. The so-called Grand Vow was made after that. Oh, Sumo frowned, but she couldn't figure out the crux of the matter. The Sacred Lotus became a Lotus scholar a long time ago, right? Sumo said, I'm not sure about that. There aren't many cultivators in the Li dynasty who have seen the Sacred Lotus. That's because he lives in seclusion. Most of his matters are handled by Li Beihan. However, none of the other princes of the dynasty are Lotus scholars. Among them, the 2nd and 4th princes have the highest cultivation levels. They're both 7th stage venerables. 7th stage venerables. If Sumo hadn't returned from the Prajnar realm, she would have been shocked to hear this. That was because this was a realm that definitely didn't exist in Shenluo and Necromancy galaxies. Gulian was indeed the strongest galaxy in Shenluo. However, this realm was the same as Wu'er and could not be mentioned in the same breath as Suimo Shao. What should we do now? Wu'er asked. Since we're here, we can't stay out of it. Sumo smiled. We should enter the Dali realm first and meet Li Beihan. Then, we should be able to see Li Water. Many things will become clear then. Demon King, it won't be easy for us to get close to the sacred Emperor planet. Although the second and fourth princes haven't touched the planet yet, they've definitely set up many forces around it, said Shunlang. Huh. Sumo laughed coldly. It's fine. If someone really stops us, I still have Lee Water's consciousness. If his consciousness is stopped, then we don't have to be polite. Yes. Shunlang nodded. Senior brother Shun, continue to monitor the situation of the entire Dali dynasty. Don't show yourself easily. We'll act according to the situation. Sumo said. All right. Shunlang nodded and looked at Wu-Er. Be careful. Wu-Er said. Yes. I'll take my leave. Shunlang bowed slightly and disappeared from the demonic ship. Xiao, you actually have a sacred lotus consciousness? Wu-Er asked. Yes. Sumo opened her hand and revealed the lotus jade pendant that Li Beihan had given her. Back then, Li Beihan gave it to me to protect myself. I could still use it one more time. Li Water's consciousness once told me that if I encountered any difficulties, I could go to the Dali dynasty to find him. Xiao! Wu-Er seemed to have thought of something. Yes. Sumo was slightly stunned. Do you think the sacred lotus can't leave the ancient lotus galaxy or even the sacred emperor planet for some special reason? Otherwise, with his friendship with AMU back then, why didn't he go to the Glaze realm to save AMU? Wu-Er said, in my opinion, no matter how strong the cultivator who sealed AMU is, Li Water would have risked his life to save him. In order to save AMU, Li Water would not hesitate to die. Yes. Sumo nodded. That should be the case. But Li Water did not do that. I guess everything is as he guessed. There's something that he needs to do more than saving AMU. This is probably why he's watching from the sidelines in this war of succession, Sumo said. He really might not be able to leave the sacred emperor planet. Both of them nodded. This kind of analysis could explain everything. But what was it that trapped the sacred lotus? They could only find out after seeing Li Water. The demonic ship continued to move forward. In front of it was the Dali realm. The demonic ship could no longer make space jumps because the space-time was too close. Sumo did not hide her tracks either. The demonic ship moved like a shuttle and headed straight for the Dali realm. At this time, a cruising flying ship came from afar. It happened to block the way of Sumo and Wu-Er. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.